Political Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host of Yao Ming of Revolution. We got to get into some hidden history. The deceivers, the identity thieves, revolutionary salute, brother. We in the building. We got to deal with some high-powered information today. I'll be running 2 lives. We have a geopolitical live this evening, but this morning it's going to be some knowledge. We got to deal with some very powerful information. So, you know, just sit back, enjoy your weekend starting today. But let's get right into it. Be sure to wipe your feet coming in the House of Revolution. Oh, that's hitting the like button. Support the platform. Subscribe to the channel, man.
If you have a cousin with a YouTube and vocal cords, you've probably heard the theory that the Ashkenazi Jews aren't really Jews at all. They're simply Jew-ish. But is there any truth to this? I'm Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. This theory that Ashkenazi Jews are not really of Middle Eastern ancestry, but are descended from an ancient Turkic civilization called the Kazars, who converted to Judaism, has gained popularity with the rise of social media. It's been adopted by all sorts of celebrities and even the Palestinian president, but it's not really new. So where did this theory come from? And is it historically accurate? And why does your cousin love it so much? Now, to be clear, I have no intention of taking you through the complete history of the Jewish people. In fact, the goal here is not to get too bogged down with the details, so we can focus specifically on this theory and whether or not it has any validity. But I want to give you the bare minimum primer on who and what we're talking about here. It's important to understand that Judaism is an ethno-religion, though it certainly has its converts. Ethnically, Jewish people are made up of 2 primary denominations, Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Sephardic Jews are descended from the Jews who migrated to the Iberian Peninsula, or modern-day Spain and Portugal, after being exiled from the ancient kingdom of Judah by the Babylonians in 597 BCE, and again by the Romans in 70 CE. They were then expelled from Spain in 1492 by the Alhambra Decree. Sephardic Jews then landed in the Balkans, Southern Europe, and North Africa. The Roman exile of 70 CE also displaced Ashkenazi Jews. They largely landed in the Danube Valley and Rhineland areas, which is modern-day Germany and Austria. Today, Jewish people can be found in every part of the world, and the majority of them are Ashkenazi. But right around the beginning of the 19th century, a small group of scholars began to theorize that Ashkenazi Jews were not really the descendants of the Semitic-speaking people who were exiled from the kingdom of Judah in modern-day Israel all the way back in 70 CE. These writers proposed that the Ashkenazim were, in fact, descended from the Khazarian Empire, a group of semi-nomadic Turkic people made up of various ethnicities that lived in southeastern European Russia, southern Ukraine, Crimea, and Kazakhstan that was established in the 7th century. The Kazars' primary religion is thought to have been Tengriism, although there were also Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Kazars. The Kazars remained in the Caucasus region from the 7th century through the 10th century. There were reports that a small portion of the Kazars converted to Rabbinic Judaism in the 8th century, but that can't be substantiated. The Kazar theory posits that when the Kazar Empire fell in the 10th century, there was a huge population of Khazarian Jewish converts that migrated from the Caucasus region to modern-day Eastern and Western Europe. The Kazar theory says that these are the people that we now identify as Ashkenazi Jews, making Ashkenazi Jews not ethnically Middle Eastern Jews by bloodline, but Far Eastern European and Western Asian converts to Judaism, thus rendering them ineligible for any right to return to their homeland in Israel. Now, where exactly did this theory come from, and is there any validity to it? Well, historians started to speculate about this in the early 19th century, but one of the primary proponents of this theory was a white supremacist and Semitic scholar named Ernest Renan. He was a Frenchman who wrote a hugely popular book in 1863 called Life of Jesus, where he claimed that Jesus was able to purify himself of his Jewish traits and become an Aryan Christian. This was considered scholarly writing at the time. In the same book, he claimed that Judaism was foolish and illogical, and that Christianity was the superior religion. The theory was rooted in eugenics and anti-Semitism, and those things started to fall out of favor by the 1930s when the Nazi Party began using them to justify the genocide of the Jewish people in Europe. After that, the theory was referenced intermittently by scholars, but remained a largely obscure. Then a man named Arthur Koestler wrote a book called The 13th Tribe in 1976, and the theory picked up a whole new audience. Now it wasn't just something that scholars were talking about. Everyday people were taking the theory and running with it if it suited their purposes. But it had no more substantiation then than it did in Ernest Renan's day. What had changed was the reason for reiterating this theory. Instead of coming from a white supremacist who was bent on undermining the Jewish faith, this time it was being validated by a Jewish man who thought that if he could prove that most Eastern European Jews, the ancestors of modern-day Ashkenazim, were really ethnically European and not ethnically Jewish, he could get rid of anti-Semitism completely. What Koestler didn't anticipate is that his book would have the opposite effect. He essentially stoked the fire of Semitism by bolstering the idea that Ashkenazi Jews had no claim to Israel, and according to some, were not a legitimate ethnic group at all. Neo-Nazis were even praising it. Koestler admitted that his evidence was scant since very little remains of the Kazar civilization. Much of the research that he referenced has been discredited by respected scholars who are experts in anthropology, etymology, and ancient civilizations. Attempting to substantiate this theory with solid archaeological, genetic, or linguistic evidence is a near impossibility. The Kazars, whose ancient civilization fell over 1,000 years ago, were a multi-ethnic polyglot society, meaning they didn't represent a single ethnicity, and they spoke a variety of languages, and there are no distinct identifiable descendants of the Kazars. Despite the difficulty of providing any solid proof of this theory, it continues to be promoted by a small group of writers and scholars, most notably Tel Aviv University professor of history Shlomo Sand and Tel Aviv University professor of linguistics Paul Wexler, as well as the geneticist Aaron Al-Haik. But from an anthropological standpoint, the theory doesn't really hold up, even when placed under the most basic of scrutiny. Number one, is there archaeological evidence to support the theory? Number two, does linguistic evidence support the theory? And three, is there genetic evidence to support the theory? Societies usually leave behind historical relics, documents, and data that help us to understand who they were and what they valued. Archaeologically, there is very little evidence to support the idea that there was a significant Jewish presence in ancient Khazaria. What we do know is that some Khazarians probably embraced Judaism, just as there were Christians and Muslims in that society, but their primary religion is thought to have been Tengrism. We know that the ruling elite may very well have converted to Judaism, but there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that those conversions were widespread. After the fall of Khazaria to the Russians in the 10th century, the next historical record of a Jewish presence in that region is in the 14th century in Western Ukraine and Belarus, where Jewish people are referred to frequently. But again, there's absolutely no historical evidence to connect those people to the ancient Khazarians that were conquered centuries before. The linguistic argument doesn't hold up either. Since the 17th century, Yiddish has been the dominant language of all Ashkenazi Jews in Central Europe. This happened because Ashkenazi Jews settled in the Rhineland and Danube Valley territories, modern-day Germany and Austria. Now, there are very few written records of any Khazaric languages that exist in the modern era. We can only deduce that their language might closely relate to other languages native to Turkic regions. Very few linguists would support the argument that Yiddish contains much influence from the languages spoken in the Turkic region where Kazars would have resided. Yiddish is a vernacular language based primarily on High German, fused with influences from the Hebrew language, Aramaic, Slavic languages, and even some traces of Romantic languages. But even the most cursory analysis of German and Yiddish would make it clear that they are in fact sister tongues. Any argument that Yiddish is more Turkic than German could probably be applied to a vast array of languages. Yiddish, the dominant language spoken by most Ashkenazi Jews, has no etymological relationship to any language currently spoken in the Kazar region. But the field of onomastics gives us some of the strongest evidence that there is little to no connection between the Rhineland and Danube Valley Ashkenazi Jews and the ancient Kazar civilization. Onomastics is the study of proper names. In these Jewish communities living in Eastern Europe that were supposedly the descendants of the Kazars, a Turkic people, there are absolutely no Turkic names recorded over the last 6 centuries, either first names or surnames. You'll find names that reference the complex history of the Yiddish language, Germanic names, Aramaic names, Polish names, even a few Greek, French, and Slavic names, but no Turkic names, none, because that is not their culture. It never was. And finally, are there genetic ties between Ashkenazi Jews and the ancient Kazars? Well, the first issue with trying to prove this theory genetically is that there are no obvious descendants of the Kazars. Let's remember that the Kazars, whose kingdom was vanquished by the Russian Empire over 1,000 years ago, were a Turkic people who resided in the northern Caucasus region. But recently, a scientist named Eren Al-Haik attempted to prove the Khazar connection by showing that there was a genetic tie with today's Ashkenazi Jews and ancient Khazars. He did this by comparing the DNA of 8 Ashkenazi Jews with the DNA of a sample group called Proto-Khazars from Georgia and Armenia that supposedly emerged from the same genetic cohort as the ancient Kazars. But he failed to acknowledge that no contemporary historians consider either Georgians or Armenians to be Proto-Khazars. In other words, linking those ethnic groups to Ashkenazim does nothing to prove that the Ashkenazim are genetically connected to ancient Kazars. Any connection they do share is likely due to their shared Middle Eastern lineage. But there's a much more straightforward method for disproving this theory than simply proving that there is no genetic tie between ethnic Ashkenazim and the supposed descendants of ancient Kazars. It has to do with looking at the genetic makeup of Ashkenazim all over the world and comparing it with other Ashkenazim. The great thing about recent advances in the field of gene research is that questions like this are no longer shrouded in mystery as they once were. Thanks to an extensive analysis of Jewish people worldwide, we now know that ethnically Jewish people have strong genetic commonalities. A study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics conducted a genome-wide analysis on 237 people from Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, Syria, Italy, Iraq, Iran, Greece, and Turkey, and compared their genetic profiles to non-Jewish people in the same regions. Researchers found a genetic thread that wove each of these Jewish populations together, regardless of where they were in the world. This study goes a long way to disprove the theory that the Jewish people are not a legitimate ethnic group, and it establishes once and for all that there are clear genetic markers that can determine a person's connection to their Jewish ancestry. Now, it's important to note that the study also determined that there was an extensive intermixing with non-Jewish Europeans among Ashkenazi Jews from the 15th century through the 19th century, when the Jewish population in Europe exploded from 50,000 to 5 million people. For that reason, most Ashkenazim today have a mix of Middle Eastern and Western and Eastern European ancestry. So Ashkenazi Jews did in fact migrate from the Middle East to modern-day Germany. But if the Kazars didn't convert to Judaism en masse and migrate to Eastern Europe and become Ashkenazim, where did they go? Well, according to most historians, nowhere. The Kazars gradually intermixed with the Turkic and Cuman populations around them and eventually disappeared as a distinct people. Nothing sexy. So why does this theory get new legs every few decades and start to pick up steam all over again? Well, maybe because it's proven to be so useful to so many people. Confirmation bias is a powerful thing. If a group is motivated enough to want to latch on to a theory that's been debunked by multiple disciplines, they'll create a new basis on which to accept it. Originally, the theory was touted by eugenicists who wanted to undermine the Jewish faith. Then it was bolstered by Jewish writers who wanted to create a genetic separation between Jews and Jewishness to mitigate the harm of anti-Semitism. Since then, it's been fully embraced by anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers who now get to claim that they're only against fake Jews and imposters. But it's the same old BS that motivated the eugenicists and anti-Semites of old. The fact of the matter is, you could disprove this theory 6 ways from Sunday, and there will still be those who choose to give credence to it because it suits their purposes. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that Jewishness, as with any culture, goes beyond mere genetics. It's expressed in beliefs, practices, traditions, and a shared experience that can never be undermined by a false origin story, regardless of how enticing it still may be to some.
Salute, family.
About the flight of the Kazar warriors out of northern Turkey in 500 AD. They were a despicable bunch. You could go to the king of the Kazars and rent an army from him, an army of 40 or 50,000 men. But it didn't matter what kind of a deal you struck with their monarch. He wasn't called a king, he was called a shagan. Once the battle was done, they rape and pillage. Doesn't matter what kind of agreement you had with the king. That's the way it ended up. And so as a consequence, people in the area garnered a great deal of animosity for these Kazar warriors. And in 500 AD, they were driven out. And as they came down south out of Turkey, some fled to the west, into Romania and Hungary and became the Gypsies. The rest followed their monarch, the Chagan, up into the steppes of Russia and north of there to the Caucasus Mountains. And as they settled in there, they relatively, well, they quite easily enslaved the relatively peaceful agrarian Slavic folks that were indigenous to the area. Then they came under pressure to take sides in a growing contention around them. Coming down from the north was Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and coming up from the south was Islam. And they knew that if they succumbed to pressure from either of those to join their organization and embrace their philosophy, it would surely offend the other.
If Palestinians really wanted peace and freedom, they would have accepted statehood the 5 times Israel offered it to them. Why should they? Because it's very generous of Israel to offer that to them. So if a burglar came into your home and then said it was his, and then was like, you know what, never mind, do you want half of it? Would you say that he was being very generous? That's not nearly the same thing. Israel was giving them like 80% of the land. You know, that was like mostly desert, and Israel kept most of the fertile land for themselves. Whatever, it's their land anyways. They can do what they want. It's not. They're indigenous to the land. Want me to believe that the Jewish people in Israel, which many of them are European descent for generations upon generations, are indigenous to that land? Yes, exactly. God gave them that land. Even in that story, there were already people there. And you know who's related to those people? Palestinians. So you're saying Israel doesn't have the right to exist? So you're anti-Semitic. You hate Jewish people. I'm saying colonization is bad, always. By that logic, America shouldn't exist either. Yes, exactly.
With that being said, I must add that I do not have a dog in this fight. I am not going for neither side. And with that being said, that land doesn't belong to neither. The children of Israel was driven out of that land, okay? So let's just keep going.
And so what they did was a politically expedient maneuver. He called in all the religious leaders of the area, and he got their input. And after the input, he announced, for me and my people, we're talking about 20 million people and about 4,000 nobility, for me and my people, we choose to become Jews. Now, this was not a heartfelt conversion. This was not something that was deep in their breasts that they felt they needed to make a conversion because they thought that was the proper way to serve the Creator. This was something that was done as a political expediency. And in the course of studying about their new religion, and you do have to study it, even if you're only going to charade, it is absolutely necessary to study about it so that you can fake it. And in the course of doing so, they came across a character with whom they could truly identify. It was Lucifer, the morning light that fell from grace and became Satan, the adversary. And they formed an inner circle within Judaism dedicated to the forces of evil. Let's define terms. What is a Jew? If you look back in your Old Testament, your Bible, there was 12 Hebrew tribes. The 10 northern tribes are called the house of Israel. The 2 southern tribes were called Benjamin and Judah, more properly pronounced Judah, because we didn't get the harder sound to the J until about 200 years ago.
Until the year 1524, there was no letter J in the alphabet. The letter J was originally the same letter as I. The father of the letter J is Gian Giorgio Trissino, an Italian author and grammarian who lived from 1478 to 1550. Now, if you do the math on it, it's 2023. The J was invented in 1524. That's 499, about 499 years ago. That's about how long you so-called blacks been in slavery, right? Okay.
So this is what I would call real Jews. people from the tribe of Judah. And when we start talking about the New World Order, we are not talking about these people at all. We're talking about these Kazar warriors that only pretended to embrace Judaism. And so today, we find that about 92% of the people who claim to be Jews really aren't. They don't have a drop of Semitic blood in their veins.
2% of the people who claim to be Jews really aren't. They don't have a drop of Semitic blood in their veins.
What? 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 What the fuck? What? Hey, yo! What? What?
They are Kazar warriors with a new bent on life.
Genesis 4:11-12. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which have opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And so this is the so-called white man. They run all over the earth. They steal lands. They disguise themselves. They hide themselves. They steal identities, because that's what fugitive and vagabonds do. They hide themselves when really they really are from the Caucasus Mountains, Caucasians, Caucasus Mountains, Ashkenazis. This is their history. Kazars.
And a goal to conquer, to rape, and to pillage. And that philosophy has come down over time, and we see how effectively they have implemented it throughout history.
As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Kazars. Who are they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Kazars and the Kazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history, the history of Kazars and the Kazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it.
Now, when they pretended to embrace Judaism, they drew upon the real Jews for some education. And they used the Hebrew alphabet as phonics to codify their Kazar language. And so now we look at that language called Yiddish or Jiddish and find that it is not Hebrew. It only appears to be. Now these people have run into some trouble over time. In 965 AD, they were overrun by the Varganians, which was Swedish-ruled Slavic people. Varganian is the Russian word for Vikings. And they were militarily defeated, which curbed their expansionist philosophy for some time. And then in 1140, they were literally overrun by the Mongols for Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan. And they were driven down into Eastern Europe. Their monarch, the king, or Chagan as he was called, fled to Spain and Portugal. Now, because these folks were a darker skinned people with black hair and brown eyes, it was easier for them to fit in with the folks of Spain and Portugal and Italy and Sicily than they could other places where they stood out and looked markedly different. And they took a great deal of control, especially in Spain and Portugal. So much so that they were discovered in conspiracy because they worked together to get themselves, one of them, into a position of authority where that person can work in tandem with others to get more of their people in authority and positions of power, and working it up to where they're running the show and milking everybody else.
Shalom, family. So that is basically a synopsis, very brief synopsis of the history of the Kazars. We are like barely scratching the surface, but it's enough to prove they stole our identity and enough to show that they are in fact not the true or original Jews that the Bible speaks of, but they have stolen our identity, and they are the synagogues of Satan, which the Bible refers them to. So all is not lost, fam. They stole our identity. They pushed this lie in the earth. They gave us a false god to worship. They changed his image. They changed his name. They changed our name. They stole our original language. They took our alphabet and created a fake Yiddish language for them to match their fake identity that they stole from us. So everything was a lie. But as I always say, we are literally living in a generation of knowledge, and is no reason for anybody to be ignorant about anything anymore. The truth is coming out. The cat is out the bag. The biggest lie that has been pushed and propagated throughout the earth is exposed. Them are not the true Jews living over there in Israel right now. And there will not be peace over in Israel because the original people that came from that land is not there. We dwell right here in captivity in America. So there can't be peace in a land if the original people that's supposed to dwell there is not there. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and 9. I know thy works and tribulations and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them that say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogues of Satan. So it's the synagogues of Satan that dwell over in Israel right now. Them that call themselves Jews, Jewish, and are not. They stole our identity. This is Revelations 3 and 9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet to know that I have loved thee. So the Most High, Yahweh, he loves us. He loves us. Yahweh Shai, our Savior, who's coming back for the Israelites only, he loves us. He said that he will make them to come and worship at our feet to know that he had loved us. He loves us. Yes, we dwell in oppression right now. We dwell in captivity right now. But everything is reversing and shifting in the earth if you're paying attention. We are literally living in the last days. Stuff is shifting. It's very important as we learn who we are. We learn our identity. We learn what we did, how we displeased the Most High and got in a position that we're in right now. We're learning all these things, but the most important thing to get out of all of this is that we need to repent of our sins and turn back to the Most High God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His name is Yahweh, and begin to keep his laws, statutes, and commandments. It's wrapping up, y'all. In Matthew 24, and I'm paraphrasing it, it says, this gospel shall spread throughout the earth to all nations, then the end shall come. So everybody got to hear who the Israelites is. Everybody got to hear this gospel. Everybody in the earth have to hear this truth before Yahweh Shai, which the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, crack them clouds, come back and save his people, deliver his people from captivity. No, nobody's saved yet. We're not saved yet. To be saved is to be delivered from the hand of your enemy and all those that hate you. We have not been delivered yet, fam. We have to repent of our sins, return back to the Most High, and keep his law, statutes, and commandments. Shalom.
The war between Israel and Gaza has sparked much conversation and much controversy. Some questions have come up regarding the legitimacy of the Jewish people residing in the state of Israel today. Are the Jews living there today the same Jewish people from the Bible that declares their ancient heritage? Or are they a different group? Impostors, perhaps, like the Kazars instead? And what role did the Rothschild family play in the establishment of the State of Israel? Have their involvement meant that the State of Israel's establishment is a move of man instead of a move of God, deeming it not a true fulfillment of biblical prophecy? And if this is a true biblical fulfillment of prophecy, why isn't the temple of God rebuilt as the Bible declares would happen? And lastly, if Israel's return is a true fulfillment of prophecy, why isn't Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus, seated on the throne already today? As for our first question, did the Rothschild family create the modern state of Israel? The story goes that the Rothschild family influenced the resettling of Jewish people both before and after World War II into the state of Israel. And therefore, this state of Israel is an invention of man instead of a move of God. The argument goes that God could not possibly use a family such as the Rothschilds to fulfill his will with bringing Israel back to the land, because this family is evil. Some even say satanic. Let's go on that train of thought to state that, yes, let's say the Rothschilds had a hand in reestablishing the state of Israel. I want to now go to some biblical examples to consider whether it would be possible for God to use such a family to accomplish his will. I want to remind you of biblical example number 1. When Israel was given a promise that they will have a land in their future that God is preparing for them, one of the most pivotal moments of bringing them one step closer to that land was when there was a man who had a snake on his head as a symbol of allegiance to the snake, the Rothschild of Egypt, if you will, Pharaoh. And God uses Pharaoh to resettle Israel into the wilderness, from where on which God would ultimately resettle them into the promised land. We read in Romans 9:17, "For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth." God used Pharaoh, and he says that I raised you up to be used for my greater purposes. Yes, Pharaoh was on the wrong side. He was a pagan king. He had a snake on his head. He worshipped other gods, and God brought judgment upon him and his kingdom. However, God still used Pharaoh even for his own purposes, because God is so great that he even uses evil against the people of God, turns it around to fulfill the will of God. Another great example that we can talk about is King Nebuchadnezzar, who was also a pagan king whom God used, on the other hand, to bring judgment upon Israel, to scatter them from Jerusalem into the nations. And God even says that I have raised Nebuchadnezzar as my servant to accomplish my will. And so Nebuchadnezzar, similarly to Pharaoh, being a pagan king, nevertheless was used by God to accomplish his greater purposes. And maybe we can go for one more example, shall we? The perfect example of Christ himself. When he was raised up on that cross, and all of his enemies laughed and thought in their hearts that they had overcome Christ's ministry and mission, God turned the tables on them. For everything that was done by evil men against Yeshua himself was there to accomplish then, ultimately, the perfect will of God, for him to die at the hands of men, but then to be raised again, to bring about restoration to the world, taking their sins upon him. Romans 8:28. We know then that those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purposes. Therefore, no matter what kind of an evil man or family or king is involved in the fulfillment of prophecies, their involvement does not negate the authenticity of the fulfillment of that prophecy. For according to the Bible, God has very oftentimes used pagan kings, rulers, elites, men of influence, even those in allegiance to the snake, to accomplish his will in directing Israel here or there. Some also state that, well, it's not even simply the Rothschild family that were involved in the creation of the state of Israel, but there were Christian politicians who were aware of the biblical prophecy, who tried to pull strings in order for this biblical prophecy to come about. And therefore, because they tried to fulfill it by their own will, it was not therefore according to God's will. That means that is an illegitimate state of Israel, therefore, because this regathering is illegitimate. That is the other argument. Now, let's consider the bar that is being set by this idea. The bar that's being set is that if at any point in the fulfillment of any prophecy, someone is involved in the fulfillment of that prophecy who is aware of that prophecy beforehand, that immediately makes the prophecy fulfillment illegitimate. But does that make sense? The reality is that whenever men have tried to bring a prophecy to fulfillment before its time, they have failed. They will continue to fail. It is impossible for prophecy to be fulfilled before its time. When a prophecy is taking place in the reality of this world, then it is being fulfilled, no matter who is involved, no matter what they may have known about it beforehand, because God won't allow it otherwise. He is the one who has the ultimate say. Therefore, according to the biblical examples we've discussed and many more in the Bible, the scriptures teach us that men, they may be good, they may be evil, but nevertheless, God can use them. And whatever God wants done, whatever prophecy says will happen. And when we perceive it to happen, we can know that the Bible is being fulfilled before our eyes. But I want to talk about another problem regarding what all of this really reveals, I believe. And that is the error of generalization, and what the motive is regarding the argument of the Rothschild family's involvement. I want to remind you of something that happened in World War II with the Nazi propaganda. When I was doing my honors degree in university, I studied Nazi propaganda because I wanted to understand how it could have been possible for a man like Hitler to deceive an entire nation such as Germany into the degree of anti-Semitism that they entered in. What I found is that it wasn't that Hitler introduced Germany to hating Jews. He only popularized it. He only reinforced the existing public opinions, and he made what is inexpressible expressible. That which was not allowed to be said before, that is, to be anti-Semitic, he being in public saying this is okay, Suddenly, society came together, and the anti-Semitism that was behind closed doors simply came out into the light, making it acceptable to persecute Jewish people. And that is exactly what is happening today, brothers and sisters. We are seeing anti-Semitism more in the open than ever before coming out because it is being popularized yet again. But it's not being popularized in the way that Hitler did it, but more covertly. See, Hitler used propaganda posters as one of his main ways of doing so. He showed in these posters Jewish people that were wealthy. Some of them were portrayed as having these big noses, being greedy, being the bankers, being evil, being rats, and all kinds of disgusting stereotypes were created. And these are really a strategy of generalization, in which you use an image of a person, whereas you're zooming into an individual within a group, and you are propping that up as a representative, a stereotype that gives truth to the entire group. And I want to submit to you that this is what is happening today. That many people in the world, and even, dare I say, some Bible teachers, have done the same. They have taught the evils of certain Jewish people, like the Rothschild family. And ultimately, they have done this to stoke hatred against all Jewish people. Like in this example, the Rothschild family is used to discredit the entire state of Israel. Without exaggeration, what we're seeing today is the exact same strategy that was invoked within the Nazi regime. The reality is, brothers and sisters, that not all Jewish people are like the Rothschild family. Not all Jewish people are like the Israeli government. Not all Jewish people are moving in droves to Israel because of their Rothschild family. They are doing so because the biblical prophecy is being fulfilled before our eyes, and they are being drawn back to Israel because God is drawing them back to Israel. And whatever actors are in Israel that aren't pure in heart, that is to be expected. Because within the state of Israel, from the first century, before the first century, unto today, there have been beautiful Jewish people with good hearts, who are people who love God and continuously try to do good. And there are people who are Jewish who do not love God, who want evil, who are greedy. But none of that discredits the good. There is a danger for Gentile believers to fall into the same anti-Semitism that is so evident in the world. What we so often forget is when we look upon Israel with all of the issues that they may have, we forget the mercies of God that He had for us when we were sinners, when we were far off, when we were evil and did continuously evil against Him, and how God had mercy on us. We forget about Nineveh and how God sent Jonah to Nineveh. Jonah thought Nineveh was way too evil, that they didn't deserve the forgiveness that God had in store. But nevertheless, God was better than Jonah and had more mercy than Jonah. God sometimes has more mercy than we do. And we should be careful to stand against His mercy and go to the people that God has sent us to, no matter what we may think as to what they deserve. Forget what we deserve without Christ. As Jonah went to Nineveh, we should provoke the Jewish people to jealousy. What about the Pharisees who spoke of Yeshua the Messiah, saying, "Does he even know who is touching him?" When the woman who was a sinner touched him, they had much less understanding of mercy than Yeshua had. This brings us to our next big question and conversation that's been going around regarding the
It was probably about that time that the Kagan of the Kazars and his grandees, together with a large number of his heathen people, embraced the Jewish religion. What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to reveal to you how the Kazarians, those people who are claiming to be the real Jews today, actually converted to Judaism. And guess what? This information is actually available on books that you can read right now. This book was published in the year 1907. Let's see what it's called. The Jewish Encyclopedia, a descriptive record of the history, religion, literature, customs of the Jewish people from the earliest times to the present day. Okay, this book comes in 12 volumes, but this one right here is volume 4, guys. Okay, so we're going to go very early in this book. I believe on page 1, we're going to read about the Kazars. We're going to see who they are and how they became Jews or Jewish today, guys. Okay, so let's get in. Okay, so here is the second title page. As you can see right here, it says volume 4. Let me zoom in so you guys can see properly. Volume 4, it begins with the what? The Kazars. That's where we're gonna focus on. Okay, the first like 2 pages of the book. Okay, so here we are. I want us to see some very important details about these people that say they are Jews. But we who have studied the Bible and we study history, we know that they are not. Okay, so here is Kazars. Who are the Kazars? A people of Turkish origin, whose life and history are interwoven with the very beginnings of the history of the Jews of Russia. Yeah, it's talking about them European Jews, guys. Okay, so let's see what else we can get from this page. We are still on page 1. I want you to see what happened here. In 679, that is 679 AD, the Kazars subjugated the Bulgars and extended their sway, their dominion farther west between the Don and the Dnieper, as far as the headwaters of the Dons in the province of Lebadia. Don't worry about these places, guys. Okay, the actual point I want you guys to see is right below. Now listen to this, guys. It was probably about that time that the Kagan of the Kazars, the Kagan meant the ruling class of the Kazars. That's what a Kagan is. So it's about that time that the Kagan of the Kazars and his grandees, these are the top class, the other nobility too, together with a large number of his heathen people. Can you see it? I hope it's clear enough for you guys to see. Heathen people did what? They embraced the Jewish religion. Okay, the conversion took place in 620. According to others, in 740, King Joseph, this king right here is a Kazarian, guys, okay? But at this point, they started adopting the names of Israelite characters. So let's keep going. King Joseph, in his letter to Hasdai Ibn Shabrot in 960 AD, gives the following account of the conversion of the Kazars, okay? So let's see what it says. Some centuries ago, King Bulan reigned over the Kazars. To him, God appeared in a dream and promised him might and glory. Encouraged by this dream, Bulan went by the road of Darien to the country of Ardabil, where he gained great victories over the Arabs. The Byzantine emperor and the caliph of the Ishmaelites sent to him envoys with presents and sages to do what? To convert him to their respective religion. Okay, so the Christians and the Muslims, they sent people to go and meet this King Bulan of the Kazars to try and convert him to either Christianity or Islam. So let's see what happened next. Bulan invited also wise men of Israel and proceeded to examine them all, as each of the champions believed their own religion to be the best. Bulan separately questioned the Mohammedans, the Arabs, and the Christians as to which of the other 2 religions they considered the better. Now, these Christians here, guys, these are not Negroes. Very important that you understand that Christianity is the religion of the Edomites, guys. I'm going to make a video on that one later on as well. But these Christians here are not Negroes, guys. These are Edomites, okay? Caucasian people as well. So this King Bulan questioned the Mohammedans, the Arabs, separately from the Christians. And then he asked them,
as to which of the other two religions they considered the better. When both gave preference to that of the Jews, the king perceived that it must be the true religion. He therefore adopted it. Okay, that is it, guys. That is how the Kazars converted and became Jewish today, guys. But there's still some more. Let's see what else we can see. This account of the conversion was considered to be a legendary nature. It was legendary, guys. It's so legendary that the effect of this conversion can still be felt on the world today, over 1,000 years later, guys. Crazy stuff. It was one of the successors of Bulan, of King Bulan, named Obadiah. So you can see they're already giving themselves biblical names at this point, guys, because they converted, right? So it was one of the successors of King Bulan, named Obadiah, who regenerated the kingdom and strengthened the Jewish religion. He invited Jewish scholars to settle in his dominion and founded synagogues and schools. The people were instructed in the Bible, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, and in the divine service of Hazanim. Okay, so while nearing the end, I want you guys to see one very important stuff. Okay, so he converted many of his people into what? Judaism. But look at this, guys. Very important point to not miss. According to Ibn Fadlan, Ibn Dashtar, and others, only the king and his grandees, the nobility, were followers of Judaism. The rest of the Kazars converted to what? Christianity and Mohammedanism, okay? Islam. And guess what? They also converted into other hedonistic religions as well. All these religions, including Christianity and Mohammedanism, are all hedonistic. Let me make that clear, okay? Even though these books like to separate Christianity and Islam from other hedonistic religions, they are all hedonistic, guys, okay? But I want you guys to realize that these Kazars did not just become Jews. They became Christians, they became Muslims, okay? And today, when you look at certain groups, like for example, the Arabs, you can clearly see that there are two shades of Arabs, guys. You can see the darker shade ones that have melanin, and then you can see these Caucasian looking ones. It's very important that you connect the dots and realize that those white Arabs that you guys see as the richest, as the most powerful Arabs today, those are Kazars, okay? They are Kazars, guys. Don't be fooled. You have to open your eyes to see what's really happening. One thing about the Kazarians is that when they join any group, whether it's a company or an institution or some organization, they never just sit content and stay in their position. It's not their way, guys. What they always seek to do is to rise up the ranks, bring in more of their people, and eventually usurp authority over the people who owned that thing before. It's how they do things, guys. It's their way, okay? They always seek to take over institutions, organizations, movements. You let a few of these Kazarians join your movement. Before long, they will bring in more of their people, and eventually they will use their money and their power and their influence to get rid of you and replace you guys, okay? They will become the new heads of whatever organization or movement or institution that you founded, guys, okay? That is the common trait of the Kazars. And the Bible actually warns us about letting these people into our organizations, into our institutions, our movements, okay? Let's go to the book of Sirach, guys. We're going to read Sirach chapter 12, verse 10. Look at what the Bible says right here. Never trust your enemy, for like as iron rusts, so is his wickedness. Though he humbles himself and go crouching, yet take a good heed and what? Beware of him. And you shall be unto him as if you had wiped a looking glass, okay? You will see his actions and you will be able to protect yourself from him. That's what it's telling you guys, okay? And you shall know that his rust has not been altogether wiped away. Even though they pretend to be nice to you, you will see that, nope, these guys are still evil. This is talking about the Kazars, okay? Let's see what it says next. Set him not by you, no, unless when he has overthrown you, and yeah, they will seek to overthrow you guys, he stands up in your place. He will replace you. Neither let him sit at your right hand unless he seeks to take your seat. And you at the last, remember my words and be pricked therewith. Okay, he's telling you these are the characteristics of the Kazarians, guys. Don't ever let a single one of them get involved with your organization, with your company, with your institution, because eventually he's going to try to replace you. Okay? That's what the Bible is telling us right here in the book of Sirach, guys. Okay, Ecclesiasticus. Okay, it's telling us to beware of the Kazars. It's describing how they move. Whenever they join your organization, your institution, they use their money and their power and their influence to eventually usurp authority over you. They will take over whatever it is you founded, guys. That's what the Bible is telling you. Okay? When I read the history books of the Kazars and I look at this scripture, I know that is who the Bible is telling us about, guys. The Kazarians. Okay? Don't deal with them. In fact, don't deal with any of the Edomites. If you know what's good for you guys, leave them be, or else they will seek to take your place. Okay, very powerful stuff, guys. Very, very powerful. Okay, so guys, I will see you on the next video.
The liar knows what lie he told. You see what I'm saying? So even if I made it deceit and I made you think that the answer is over here, but the answer is really over here, I'm still going to be looking over here. Me, the one that tricked, because I know this is the right answer. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. But our oppressors have not lost our identity. But our oppressors have not lost
So, a little over 1,000 years ago, as Jewish people scattered around the world had now immigrated in Europe and now were living in the Rhineland in Germany, they looked at the name Gomer in Genesis 10, and they connected Gomer with Germany, so they took on the identity of the name Ashkenaz. It has nothing to do with Ashkenaz in the Bible, which is a descendant of Japhet. It's just a name that was taken. Okay, it's that simple. Just like my last name Brown doesn't refer to the color of my skin or anything else. It was shortened from a Russian name when my grandfather came over at Ellis Island. The name got shortened to Brown. It's just a name. That's all it is. So the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Japhet is a myth, 100% false.
You can't see it, but it says up there that this is the 4th of March, 2022. So in 1914, there was a revolution in Russia. 1914. 3 years later, the Kazarians out of Ukraine, where am I at here? Out of the Ukraine, the Kazarian mafia out of the Ukraine took over the Russian Revolution through several of their agents, including Vladimir Lenin. Okay, so when that happened the revolution happened in 1914. For 3 years, they held the Tsar and his family captive. And we're in the process of rebuilding the Federation of Russia at that time. This is 1914. From 1914 to 1917, even in the midst of that revolution, even in the midst of the Russian Revolution, the very, very heart of it all going down, Russia had the most effective agriculture system on this planet. Russia fed most of Western Europe and a great deal of Africa and Asia. Russia was the breadbasket for the planet. It was the most efficient production system we've ever seen for food. It has never been equaled on a calorie in to calorie out basis, okay? And in 1917, the Khazarian mafia got really, really, really pissed, and they moved out of Ukraine. They moved out of Ukraine and they went into Russia, and they called themselves Bolsheviks, and they took over the Russian Revolution, and they destroyed that food system, and all of the people, 2 million plus people on the outskirts, and 12 million people in the greater Khazarian area, Ukraine and so on, and Kazakhstan and all of this. 12 million people in there died from starvation. It was twice the claimed death rate for people killed by Hitler. And you don't ever hear anybody talking about it because it was the Kazarian mafia, the Ukrainians, taking over and doing their fish here that caused this. Here's something you need to know about the Kazars, okay? The Kazarian Empire extended from this area here, went through, let me get a marker here, see if this will work. Okay, so this is the former abroad. Nah, that's not going to do it. Anyway, so we have here, there we go, better. We have a Kazarian Empire that at one point went over, there we go, into the northern part of India. And we know this, that in spite of the formalities that said that the old Kazarian Empire ended in this area here, we know it extended over as far as this boundary here, because there are persistent historical, not myths. They do have some aspects of legend, but they're inculcated into our expressions in all of our languages. So even in Chinese, so in China, there is this, the cultural work for the Chinese is called The Journey to the West. Really, it's a cool book. Jackie Chan's made several movies about the central characters in that book. All Westerners should read it if you want to understand the Chinese mind. It doesn't aid you understanding the CCP and those people, but it does aid you in understanding the cultural milieu in which China has arisen to the modern state here. Okay, but even in Journey to the West, there are aspects to this little story here. The Chinese had this phrase, this expression that you had to watch out for, the name stealers.
So a little over 1,000 years ago, as Jewish people scattered around the world had now immigrated in Europe and now were living in the Rhineland in Germany, they looked at the name Gomer in Genesis 10, and they connected Gomer with Germany. So they took on the identity of the name Ashkenaz. It has nothing to do with Ashkenaz in the Bible, which is a descendant of Japhet. It's just a name that was taken. Okay, it's that simple. Just like my last name Brown doesn't refer to the color of my skin or anything else. It was shortened from a Russian name when my grandfather came over at Ellis Island, and then got shortened to Brown. It's just a name. That's all it is. So the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Japhet is a myth, 100% false.
The Chinese had this phrase, this expression that you had to watch out for, the name stealers. We have that same expression arising from Europe in 800 AD. That was when it was written down in 800 AD. It was written down in Europe. Watch out for the name stealers. Don't have anything to do with them. All of this kind of stuff. You're just going to get into trouble. And the name stealers here that are being referenced, and the name stealers referenced in China that goes back even further than that, 800 AD. Now, this was written down in 800 AD. They may have had it for 1,000 years before that as part of the heritage in the Oralinda, the Codex Oralinda. This is where I'm referencing it, right? But it's written down in other areas, in other literature. I think even Chaucer had a little bit of an allusion to it. But in any event, so it goes back some period of time. And these are the name stealers, okay? Because the Khazarians were this group. Now in China, they described it as if you go far enough west, you will run into these people that will invite you into their village as a traveler. They will feed you. You will have a nice drink. You have a great night. They put you in the best bed in the inn, and then they kill you. Okay, then they kill you. They take all of your possessions and they steal your name. Now, while you're having dinner with them and they're getting you drunk and stuff, and they're drugging you up, They were known to really use drugs and be black magic kind of people, right? A lot of black magic is associated with the ability to know how certain drugs will affect the mind, et cetera, and you can introduce them into food. So mostly a lot of magic per se is dealing with drug states for the mind. That aside, the Chinese had the saying, or had the understanding that if you went there, they would get your story. They would steal your name and your story. And so the Kazarians were known by the Chinese, and so, but it was known on both sides. So if you were over here and you were going to try and do business with the Chinese and you went through there, you might run into one of these groups of the Kazarians that would kill you after learning everything they could about you. They would steal your story. Then they would go to China, pretend to be you, make the deal, and then go back, and the deal never happened. You might run into one of these groups of the Kazarians that would kill you after learning everything they could about you. They would steal your story. Then they would go to China, pretend to be you, make the deal, and then go back, and the deal never happened. You might run into one of these groups of the Kazarians that would kill you after learning everything they could about you. They would steal your story. Then they would go to China, pretend to be you, make the deal, and then go back, and the deal never happened.
So a little over 1,000 years ago, as Jewish people scattered around the world had now immigrated in Europe and now were living in the Rhineland in Germany, they looked at the name Gomer in Genesis 10, and they connected Gomer with Germany. So they took on the identity of the name Ashkenaz. It has nothing to do with Ashkenaz in the Bible, which is a descendant of Japhet. It's just a name that was taken. Okay, it's that simple. Just like my last name Brown doesn't refer to the color of my skin or anything else. It was shortened from a Russian name when my grandfather came over at Ellis Island. The name got shortened to Brown. It's just a name. That's all it is. So the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Japhet is a myth, 100% false.
After learning everything they could about you, they would steal your story. Then they would go to China, pretend to be you, make the deal, and then go back, and the deal never happened. So they're off both sides, really. That was the thing, right? These were truly evil people. Now, both sides of the trade equation understood that there were nasty people. And in the Codex Oralinda, they're described as being to the east, and the Chinese are describing them as being to the west. Aha. Anyway, so here we are in our current war. All right. And so in our Budo at the moment, we're discussing the active war that's ongoing, but it's not really a war. They're trying to make it a war in the United States, Britain, France, all these places that are controlled by the Kazarian mafia, right? Politically, because that's what they've done. They've stolen lots of names and they've inculcated themselves all over the planet as a hidden control mechanism. Now, so, all right, so it gets really tricky, and you have to be careful about all of this because you'll get not only lost in the weeds of all of it. The history is fascinating, but you have to be careful because you'll fall into traps that have been set by the Kazarians. All right, so the Kazarians were a nomadic people that are descended from the Mongols that interbred with people and had a particular phenotype. Now, this particular phenotype, with this clan of the Kazarians, was in a real bind at one point because they were trapped between the Byzantine Empire, which was also the Holy Roman Empire, and they were trapped between Turks in the rising Ottoman Turkey Empire. And they had a big problem. They couldn't go and deal with the Turks without fighting with the Holy Roman Empire. They couldn't deal with the Holy Roman Empire without fighting with the Turks. So they were squeezed. So they decided to claim that they were Jews. So they decided to claim that they were Jews.
I want to start off by stating that not a single Negro or African group was included in any of their testing. And when I say their testing, I am referring to the Israeli geneticists. They were very selective of the Eurasian, in other words, Europe Asian people groups they chose in an attempt to manipulate their expected outcome. Now, this is coming from an article titled Out of Khazaria, Evidence for Jewish Genome Lacking. This is coming from Aaron Elhig, an Ashkenazi Jewish geneticist. It reads, Aaron Elhig, a geneticist at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, thinks so. In a recently published study in Genome Biology Evolution, he is calling for a rewrite of commonly held assumptions about Jewish ancestry. Instead of being primarily the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, present-day Jewish populations are, finds Elhig, primarily the children of a Turkish people who lived in what now is Russia, north of Georgia, east of Ukraine. This civilization, the Kazars, converted from tribal religions to Judaism between the 7th and 9th centuries. The controversy cut into Elhig's works runs deep. Far past the lab bench, among some circles, his conclusions are bound to be unpopular. This is the first scientific paper to prove the Kazarian hypothesis and reject the Rhineland hypothesis, he says, and with it about 40 years of research. Although his findings will not be welcome in all circles, Elhig's interest is more medical than political. All I want is to help my colleagues who are studying genetic disorder, he says. I hope this work will open up a new era in genetic studies where population stratification will be used more. Let's highlight another point of this article. Previous studies had, for example, combined the question of similarity among and between Jewish populations and the question of ancestry and relatedness to non-Jewish populations. Elhig viewed these questions separately. Jewish communities are less homogeneous than is popularly thought, he says, with Jewish communities along the former Khazarian border showing the most heterogeneity. His second question centered on ancestry. When comparing Jewish communities to their non-Jewish neighbors, Caucasus or Levant, in other words, Middle Eastern populations, which is the closest to Jews. All Eurasian Jewish communities are closer to Caucasus populations, he writes, with Central European Jews closer to Italian non-Jews as the exception. Not one of the 8 evaluated Jewish populations were closer to Levant populations. Let me read that again. Not one of the 8 evaluated Jewish populations were closer to Levant populations. So I want to say this again. Not a single Negro or African group was included in any of their testing. And again, when I say their testing, I am referring to the Israeli geneticists. They were very selective of the Eurasian people groups they chose in an attempt to manipulate or control or dictate their expected output.
So they decided to claim that they were Jews, and so they couldn't be Christian, they couldn't be Muslim, but they wouldn't be dealt with by either of them. But the fact is that the clan here was not descended from Shem through Judah, right? I mean, it's not descended from that line biblically. But the fact is that the clan here was not descended from Shem through Judah, right? I mean, it's not descended from that line biblically. So these people at that time were 3%, 4% of a larger population in this region in here that was related to them by clan. So they were related to the Germans, the Poles, etc., because they'd been interbreeding for some period of time. This population in here decided that they were going to be Jewish, and within their understanding of Judaism, these people devised I guess we could say it was a scheme, a plot, a plan, etc., that spread a particular understanding through not only through Judaism, but through Christianity. It impacted Christianity of what books were left out of the Bible, and because these people had control over King James and the people that were doing King James Bible, all of this kind of stuff, these people had control over a lot of that. So they have altered history, philosophy, viewpoints, all of these things in order to protect themselves, because they were the name stealers. They were going to steal names real big and go on and promulgate it to the point where we're here now. And so we're at war now, and we see Putin invading and starting a great World War III and everything by invading Ukraine. And that's a bunch of bullshit. It's a bunch of horseshit. Okay. I actually think now that I was inaccurate about Xi, and Xi will be participating in this as well. And I think that they're going to invade Taiwan. But what's going on is the eradication of the biolabs that are controlled by the Kazarian mafia. And by that, we also include Fauci, Biden, all of the fuckers in the United States who are also controlled by the Kazarian mafia. And we note that they all have huge bank accounts here. And look at how Zelensky, the head of Ukraine as a nation, has got this big, huge $34 million villa over here in Florida. So what's he doing? Planning on bugging out when it gets too cold there? Anyway, it's all interconnected, right? And so we're entering a period of war here. We're in a period of war now. We've been in a period of war all of my life, since 1963 in the assassination of Kennedy. And so we're in a period of war that's developing, and as I had forecast months back, the language is bursting out. Now, our war language is going to be tainted by the other side because they're trying to gin it up as a nation-state war. Oh, evil Russians. And that's not it. Now we've got a case here that is really bizarre for the mainstream media, for the powers that be, because you've got a lot of people in the United States saying, yay, Putin, yay, Putin. And he's supposed to be the enemy according to our powers that be. And so this would be the equivalent of a bunch of people here in the United States after the bombing and everything had actually started saying, yay, Hitler, right? In the 1940s. You just wouldn't see that happening. Here, we're not coalescing the way that the powers that be want around this idea that Putin is the bad guy, that there's this World War III and so on, because so many of us know what the fuck is going on, and we're awake to the history and the problems that have been caused by these others in Kazaria, and they've just got to go. Okay, so we've got to get rid of all of these things, all these people. Now, here's something to understand. In my opinion, Judaism had been taken over. Okay, they were the first group that was infiltrated by the bug, and for there are a lot of reasons having to do with the nature of a philosophical trait within the source code for Judaism. Okay, and so this is where we get into this issue of source code. I'm of the opinion, because I bought a set here of the Talmud, and I've read as much of that thing as I could possibly plow through, and there are parts of it that are truly disgusting. Okay, to see aspects of pedophilia ritualized, okay, codified. So it is a source code at that stage. And I won't go into that at the moment. All right. But in any event, within the Talmud, you have to understand, you cannot read it alone. It's 63 volumes. It's huge. It's commentary. A lot of people think of it as comedy, as it's thought of in many, many, many different contexts. But my way of thinking is that this is a meta layer of a code base, and that the Talmud has to be used to read the Jewish Bible, and that this is why in the Talmud they are so against. It was really funny because there were a lot of people in 325 AD that told Constantine, "Oh my God, you stupid emperor!" They didn't say it that way. Don't join the Jewish Old Covenant with the New Testament. Don't do it. They're not related, blah, 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 blah. They did it anyway, right? So the Bible is created as this combined work that basically includes the Torah with the New Testament. But it's really funny is that there were a lot of these people that were on the Jewish side saying, or on the Talmudic side, not the Jewish side, but on the Talmudic side saying don't do it. But it was necessary that it be done, and Constantine, unlike Justinian later on, well, I won't go into that, but Constantine was maneuvered into doing this by Kazarians in his cabinet structure, because they had been infiltrating for years and years and years. As I say, for at least 6,000 years, they've been, the people that have been involved with all of this Kazarian stuff have been involved in this deep death cult that I frame as space alien influence, right? Anyway, though, so we have here the Talmud as a meta layer that is floating above, and you read the text of the Jewish Bible through the lens of the Talmud to understand this other massive layer of knowledge that can be gained from doing so. Now, this is not something most people are going to want to do for lots of reasons, because it gets you into some really seriously darkish. But it gets even worse than that, or it is even more magnified than that, because there's this thing called the Zohar, and it is part of the Jewish Kabbalist, okay? And this is from where we get the Cabal, right? But the Kabbalists are, they're like, so the Zohar has to be used as a lens to move and magnify and cite, as in terms of position, effectively, the Talmud, so that you can read the underlying stuff with an understanding.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13, Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was Abraham, born in the city of a black man called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel, according to Genesis chapter 10.
Piercing shrieks of anguish filled the land. Childless and brokenhearted, they now sought to leave, but they were told they had forfeited their right and were given a choice between baptism or slavery. And after enduring all they did, after leaving their beloved Spain with all their wealth and ease, they were submitted to baptism now, in the hope of being reunited with their children. Thousands were sold as slaves. Yet prior to being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, to revolting, to repulsive, to heart-rending, to be here narrated. All Jewish children below 14 years of age were to be torn from their parents' arms or were beaten with clubs, dragged into a church and baptized. Those under 3 years of age were given to Christians to be raised as slaves. Those between 3 and 10 years of age were put on board of a ship and conveyed to the newly discovered unwholesome island of St. Thomas, called the Hesperides, or the Isles of Destruction.
The Jews have experienced fully the unequal skill of the church in administering pain. Mothers cast themselves at the feet of the tyrants and pitifully begged to be taken with their babies. They were heartlessly thrust aside. Hundreds of mothers, mad with despair, ran behind the ships as they carried off the idols of their heart and perished in the waves, the same fortitude with which the exiled people had borne so many.
The Moors and Jews of Spain, by Joseph Kraskoff.
Shalom, shalom, Israel. It's your brother Benaiah Ben Israel, coming to you with the lesson 100 Proof Judah's DNA. That's 100 Proof Judah's DNA. And most high willing, we will share some DNA evidence to show you and to prove that you, so-called Negro, that you, so-called African American, are indeed descendants of the house of Judah. That you are indeed descendant of the children of Israel. Hallelujah. Well, you know, family, when our brothers and sisters first started bringing out this truth, of course, we started with the Bible. We started reading Bible verses and Bible scriptures to prove that we are descendant of the house of Judah, that we are descendant from the children of Israel. And of course, there were naysayers, and naysayers would say things like, well, I don't see it that way, or that's your interpretation, or where's the proof? And of course, we brought forth proof. This is when we started bringing forth old books in particular. And the reason why we focused on the old books was because we noticed that the new books had a totally different history compared to the old books. Like, for example, the new books would say things like the brews are white, whereas the old books would say the brews are black, swarthy, dark skin, brown skin. You know, any synonym you can think of to describe a dark skinned, brown skinned person, specifically when describing the brews of Spain and Portugal. And also another important part of our history that was plugged in using these old references was the part of our history that occurred just before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. So if you don't know, the transatlantic slave trade started off with Spain and Portugal. And when we looked at the old books, we noticed that the brews in Spain and Portugal, less than 10 years before the start of the transatlantic slave trade, hundreds of thousands of these black, brown, swarthy, dark-skinned brews were being persecuted, were being enslaved, and most importantly, were being expelled and shipped to the west coast of Africa, to the exact same places where the transatlantic slave trade would start from less than 10 years before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. And so this was a major piece in revelation of our history. However, we didn't stop there, fam, because we like to have a diverse collection of evidence. So we also included cranial analysis, which is the study of skulls. And what we discovered was that these black, swarthy, very dark, very black, dark-skinned brews of Spain and Portugal, we discovered that their skulls were classified as dolichocephalic. Now, the importance of their skulls being classified as dolichocephalic is because the skulls of the so-called Negroes, you guessed it, is dolichocephalic, right? So our skulls match their skulls. And of course, family, we didn't stop there. We also took a look at monuments, depictions of the brews. And for me, one of the most important pictures of the brews has to do with the Lakesh relief, which can be found in the London Museum. So that's the Lakesh relief, which you can find the history of the Lachish relief, or the story behind the Lachish relief in your Bible. Just to give you a quick summary, the Lachish relief depicts an event that occurred when the king of Assyria, or King Sennacherib, comes down and makes war against the house of Judah, the territory of Judah. And as he's going through and he's conquering the different cities in Judah, one of the cities that he conquers is called Lachish, the city of Lachish, which is near Jerusalem. It's a neighboring city of Jerusalem. And keep in mind that the city of Lachish is in the territory of the tribe of Judah. Hallelujah. And so as the king of Assyria is coming down to make war against the city of Lachish, which is inside the tribe of Judah's territory, they actually conquer the city, and they actually, kill many of the Brews. They take prisoners. And then when they go back to Assyria, they commemorate this great victory with a stone relief, or a stone picture, stone monument. And within this monument, they depict themselves as laying siege to the city. They depict themselves as killing many of the Brews. What you'll see here in a couple of the photos coming up, you'll see them impaling the Brews. You'll see them throwing the Brews over the sides of the walls. And you also see them taking the Brews captives. And as you're looking at the screen on the bottom left-hand corner, that's a screenshot. You're looking at a screenshot of the Lachish relief of the captives of the tribe of the captives of the city of Lachish. And one of the most remarkable characteristics you can pick up right away in this picture is that their hair is nappy, woolly hair, right? Short, nappy, woolly hair, which is the total opposite of the Brews today. This is one of the key reasons why we tell people that the Brews of Judah are a black Negroid people. And it's obvious based off of the depiction in the Lachish relief. Now, let's go ahead and click through and take a look at some of these pictures. Before we do that, let's read about the Lachish relief, or the story behind the Lachish relief. And we can find that in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 1 through 9. That's 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 1 through 9, if you want to read it on. All right. As the following reference reads, after these things and the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah and encamped against the fenced cities, and thought to win them for himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains which were without the city, and they did help him. So there was gathered much people together, who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the king of Assyria come and find much water? And also strengthened himself and built up all the wall that was broken, and raised it up to the towers, and another wall without, and repaired Milo in the city of David, and made darts and shields in abundance. Verse 6, and he set captains of war over the people, and gathered them together to him in the street of the gate of the city, and spake comfortably to them, saying, be strong and courageous, be not afraid nor dismayed for the king of Assyria, nor for all the multitude that is with him. For there be more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is Yahuwah our Adoni, to help us and to fight our battles. And the people rested themselves upon the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. Verse 9. After this did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, send his servants to Jerusalem, but he himself laid siege against Lachish, and all his power with him. Hallelujah. And of course, let's go ahead and finish out this verse here, where it says, unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, and unto all Judah that were at Jerusalem, saying, and of course it goes into verse 10, but we're going to stop right there. The main takeaway here from these verses 1 through 9 is you can see that King Sennacherib was laying siege to Lachish, right? And so let's take a look at some of the artifacts. So first thing we're going to take a look at is a map of Israel, right? And you can see Jerusalem there in the middle of your map, and you can see the city of Lachish, the neighboring city, off to the left. Some of us feel that Jerusalem is in a different spot, but we'll go with what's on the map for now. All right, we'll save that for another day. All right, but the takeaway here is that Lachish is close to Jerusalem, and Lachish is in the territory of the tribe of Judah. All right, so here's an aerial map of the city of Lachish. It's on the mound. And let's take a look at some of the pictures off of the relief. And you've seen this one before, and we called out and pointed out the nappy, woolly hair of the children of Judah, right? And here's another shot of the children of Judah, the captives that are being taken by the Assyrian soldiers. And this is the killing of the children of Judah being impaled, right? You can barely make out the short, nappy, woolly hair, but you can still see that it's short and woolly, right? In these pictures, right? And same here. This is, I believe this picture depicts the Assyrian soldiers throwing the soldiers of Judah over the wall. All right. In this picture, you can see the Assyrian soldier decapitating or beheading a brother or a soldier of Judah. All right. And this is just a broader shot of the Lakesh relief. Now, this is just a small portion of the Lakesh relief in the London Museum. It actually spans a hallway, and it depicts the entire sieging of the Lakesh by the Assyrian army, and also depicts them overtaking the walls, impaling our brothers and sisters, and then killing them, of course, and then taking them captives. So it's a pretty extensive stone relief. But the main takeaway for us is that we can see firsthand that the people that were fighting against them, the people that were killing them, depicted them as a Negroid people, right? And that's obvious. And it is obvious that the people in Israel today do not match the depiction of the bruise on the Lakesh relief. But it doesn't stop there, family. So when all this killing was performed, or all this killing was done, what we find in Lakesh is a mass grave site. And of course, fam, there was an archaeological research or archaeological dig that occurred at Lakesh, where they analyzed the skulls and the bones at the city of Lakesh. And this is a report of some of the findings from this research. And let's take a look. Let's read. It says, the first report on Lakesh skulls included a thorough examination of pathology, metrics, artificial deformation, and epigenetic affinity, utilizing craniometrics. Risden, 1939, concluded that the group was very similar to dynastic Egypt material. In fact, listen, fam, it says, in fact, he stated that the entire population, right, the entire population was of foreign origin, representing descendants of a group derived primarily from Upper Egypt. So perhaps they looked at those bones and they saw Afro puffs and picks. No, just kidding, family. But they found the skulls of black people, right? And they say, oh, these guys are foreigners, right? But the takeaway here that we've read so far is that the entire population was of foreign origin, right? And from Upper Egypt. And now just keep in mind that there's Upper Egypt and then there's Lower Egypt, right? And in your mind, when you think Upper Egypt, you're thinking North Egypt. But actually, when they say Upper Egypt, we'll actually see it here in a couple of slides, but Upper Egypt is actually south. It's the south part of Egypt, not the north part. So they're talking about the skulls that they found match what they would normally see in the south part of Egypt, right? Closer to Nubia, right? But let's keep reading. It says, this conclusion was subsequently supported by a craniometric study by Musgrave and Evans in 1981, Keita in 1988, likewise examined the skulls metrically, omitting those that were either artificially deformed, female, warped, split, or juvenile, using only those measurements that he believed were consistent population discriminators. All right, here we go, fam. It says, he concluded that the group was fairly heterogeneous, having close relationship to North African, Egyptian, and Nubian groups, thus lending support to an Egypto-Nubian presence, right? Egypto-Nubian presence. So the takeaway here is that they looked at the skulls and they classified them as Egypto-Nubian, aka black skulls, aka the entire population. We're not just talking about a sprinkling of these skulls. We're talking about the entire population in the city of Lakesh, the entire population in the territory of Judah had Egypto-Nubian skulls. But let's keep reading, because initially this report said that they initially thought that these skulls were of foreign origin. But let's see if they changed their mind. It says, the last paragraph on the right, it says, one of the first to oppose the idea of an Egyptian origin was Keith in 1940, who felt that the Lachish inhabitants were markedly different from Egyptians, though his analysis was rather anecdotal. Others have since concurred, arguing that the people of Lachish were indigenous, closely related to pre-Middle Bronze Age skeletons in Palestine. I'm going to pause right here, family, because basically what they're saying is that the reason why they're saying that the skulls of Lachish were not foreigners was because they found other skulls in Palestine, which is Israel, that match these skulls in Lachish, right? That's what they're saying, fam. So you have to ask yourself, so they're finding these Egypto-Nubian skulls in Lachish, and based on this next paragraph, they're also finding these Egypto-Nubian skulls in Palestine. And if you finish reading, it says, and the modern day Bedouin. That means that there were an abundance of black people, black skulls in the land of Israel, in the territory of Judah. All right, well, let's keep going, family. I just want to show you Upper and Lower Egypt. You can see that Upper Egypt is the south part of Egypt next to Cush. And that matches what we see on the Lachish relief of a people with nappy, woolly hair, right? So the skulls say that these were an Egypto-Nubian people. And also the Lachish relief showing people with nappy, woolly hair also tells us that they are an Egypto-Nubian black people. Hallelujah. All right, well, let's keep going, fam, because again, we didn't want to stop there. And this is where we get into the next phase of our research, right, of these revelations. And for this, we're going to bring up DNA, or we're going to review DNA. And for DNA, for a lot of us, or many of you have probably taken Ancestry.com or 23andMe DNA reports. And of course, we know that there are many other DNA companies out there, but there are different companies that you can run your, you can take their DNA report, and many of them will give you a map. And within the map, they'll show you what places around the world that your DNA matches up with. And what you're looking at on the map is a map of my DNA report with Ancestry.com. And as you can see, as expected, I have lots and lots of matches in Africa. And here's just a broader view of my DNA report. So you'll see those same African DNA matches, but you also see Portugal, on the top part of the map. You also see France, an area of France. And you also will see Britain, right, or England at the very top part of the map. And the reason why we're getting these matches is because the DNA tests today are matching your DNA against present day population groups, right? So they'll take your DNA and then they'll take a look at the DNA that was sampled over in Nigeria, or they'll take a look at the DNA that was sampled from a living population over in Angola. And they'll take a look at it and say, whoa, it looks like your DNA matches these populations over in these certain areas. And that's how they generate these reports. And it's interesting, at least for me, when I saw the Portuguese map, of course, if you've listened to Hidden Hebrews and you've heard about all of the history of Spain and Portugal, you'll know that the Spanish and Portuguese brews were sent to the west coast of Africa. And for me, when I saw that match in Portugal, that was very significant. But we'll explore that a little bit later in this presentation. But the takeaway here is that the DNA reports that are generated from Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and all these other modern day DNA companies, it's a report that's based off of population groups that are around today. And so these DNA reports are good resources or sources to check your DNA against modern day populations. However, the Achilles heel of using this type of DNA research has to do with migrations, has to do with the movement of people. And I remember watching a gentleman by the name of Spencer Wales, and he was associated with National Geographic's, Human Genome Project, basically mapping or tracing everybody's ancestry all the way back to Africa. And I remember he mentioned something profound or something significant to me, and that was, he said, he basically talked about the Achilles heel of DNA, and it was the movement of people, right? If, let's say, for instance, if a group got wiped out, right? Europeans showed up, North America wiped out all the Native Americans and replaced that native population. Well, when we run our DNA report, and the DNA report today is going to match modern day populations, it's not going to pick up necessarily a large population of the Native American population because most of them were wiped out, or Just pick any other place around the world where a population was wiped out and replaced by another population group, that group's DNA may not show up in a DNA report, right? So with that being said, that is the Achilles heel of using these modern day DNA reports like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, is that it doesn't account for the movement of these groups, especially when they're wiped out, persecuted, or if they're expelled, like we know the Spanish and Portuguese brews were. So to adjust for that, what we're proposing is a paradigm shift. And what I mean by that is that instead of comparing your DNA to a modern day population, through Ancestry.com or 23andMe, instead, compare your DNA to ancient DNA. And you can compare your DNA to ancient DNA because whenever there's an archaeological dig or an archaeological site, and in some of those sites, they're able to extract DNA, whether it be from a tooth or extract DNA from a bone marrow, right, from these sites. And what they're doing is that they're taking this DNA that they're extracting from these ancient sites and then storing them into a database. And then along comes a company by the name of mytrueancestry.com that allows you to compare your very own DNA to the DNA that's found in these ancient burial sites all around the world. Hallelujah. Now, I will give you a bit of caution, because the way that My True Ancestry makes their money is, I believe that initially they'll offer you the ability to compare your DNA to around 20 sites, 20 archaeological sites free. The way My True Ancestry makes their money is the more sites you want to compare, the more money that they charge, right? Initially it's free, but if you want to start comparing against many sites, there is a cost associated with that. So just wanted to let you know that up front. For us as so-called African Americans, or for us as so-called Negroes, it's profound because it allows us to test our DNA against the people that were there long ago. Like when we were looking at the city of Lachish, potentially, if they were able to extract DNA from the city of Lachish, we could literally see if our DNA matched any of the remains that they pulled out of that site. Hallelujah. Wouldn't you want to know that? And that way you would know for sure, using your very own DNA, whether or not you have relatives in those sites or in those countries. And for this, fam, we want to make this a personal journey, right? We want to make this a personal journey using your very own DNA, because when you run your DNA and your DNA information comes back as a match, then no one can take that away from you, right? Your DNA comes back as a match in Jerusalem, or your DNA comes back as a match in Lebanon or Spain and Portugal. No one can take that away from you, right? There's no debates. There's no discussion, just simple comparison. Your DNA matched the DNA they found in those places, right? All right. Well, what you're looking at on your screen is a report from My True Ancestry. And this is from my DNA report. So I uploaded my DNA. So I initially took a DNA test with Ancestry.com. And when you take it, whether it's through Ancestry.com or 23andMe and some of those other DNA companies, they will allow you to download your DNA file, and it literally downloads into a single file. And then you take that and then you can upload it to My True Ancestry. Like I said, initially it's no cost, it's for free. So you can take your DNA, upload it to My True Ancestry, and then they'll run it through their analyzer. Then they'll generate a DNA report. And so this is my DNA report. And an interesting thing that you'll find right off the bat is that my DNA matches archaeological sites, or DNA that was found in archaeological sites in the Middle East. But how can that be? Because on Ancestry.com, I didn't have any matches in the Middle East. What's up with that, fam? You see where I'm getting at, fam? You see what the significance of this report? When they compare my DNA to modern day populations in Israel in Ancestry.com, I didn't have any matches. But when they compared my DNA to the DNA extracted from those ancient DNA sites that date back to the time of Israel, back to the time of the Messiah even, I get a match. Hallelujah. Wow, that's powerful, fam. So this is what we're encouraging people to do, to start to make this DNA journey a personal journey, right? And also, fam, I want to show you that also in this DNA report, I had matches in Spain and Portugal. And just know that there are many archaeological sites in Spain and Portugal, but specifically my DNA matched in certain areas like Granada, Spain. If you don't know, Granada, Spain is the city where the Brews and the Moors lived. right? The Hebrews and the Moors lived. And actually on my DNA match, it literally said a match of the Moors, right? And so that is significance because in these archaeological sites, the dates are pretty well known. They're actually able to carbon date those archaeological sites and they give you a specific date. So on my DNA report for Granada, Spain, I matched remains that were found there before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. And the significance of that is that some naysayers will say things like, well, the only reason why you're matching, you have matches in Spain and Portugal is because of the transatlantic slave trade and they brought you up into Spain and Portugal. Well, I matched a site that dates back before the start of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Or before the Arab invasion. Hallelujah. This confirms the information that we were bringing out about Spain and Portugal. And family, once you run your DNA, if you have matches in Spain and Portugal, there's no discussion. There's no question that you have family there, right? All right. Another thing that these matches prove is that there were Black people in those areas. Because you can see on the screen, it says, who are you matching? In order for your DNA to pop up as a match, and you're a so-called African-American, or your DNA is E1B1A, right? That's the DNA haplogroup of so-called African-American males. Roughly 60-something% of African-American males today are categorized as E1B1A. And the only reason why it's not higher is because of the amount of rape that occurred during the time of slavery. Because if you extract the injection of the European DNA group, such as R1b, you start to get averages in the 85% range instead of the 60% range, as far as the number of African Americans that are E1B1A. But the main takeaway here, fam, is that this confirms two things. It confirms that, of course, you match, and it also confirms that your ancestors were there, Black folks were there, long before the start of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Which, according to some of these, modern day DNA reports, that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't be. So let's take a look at some of the data behind these matches. So what I did was that I went and took a look at some of the research that was associated with these archaeological digs. And in particular, I was most interested in the samples, like the DNA samples they were extracting from these sites. And when I started taking a look at these samples, I started to notice the first thing that they did was that they categorized the DNA that they extracted into haplogroups, into groups. And as you can see on the screen, this is a site from ancient Israel. And you can see it says in green, E1B1B, and it says E1B1A. That's the DNA of the so-called African-American today, right? The so-called Negro, E1B1A. So what's E1B1A doing in Israel, fam, during ancient times, right? And that's why you have a match in those areas. It's not just one report, fam. I mean, you can find this in multiple reports associated with these archaeological sites. For example, we reviewed a DNA sample called SFI43. And what we found is that when they analyzed SFI43, they discovered that it was closely related to ancient Egyptians. And it wasn't closely related to the modern day population. Again, you can see, fam, that the bodies and the DNA that's in the ground aren't necessarily matching the modern day populations that are in the area. And that just further proves the point of these modern day populations came in at a later date, right? And that's what's throwing off your DNA reports when you run your DNA today. But again, this report actually matches up with the Lakesh report that we read at the beginning of this session. This DNA report matches up with the Lakesh report that we read at the start of this session. And that is, this report shows that the remains that they found are related to ancient Egyptian. And remember, in the Lakesh report, they also found that those remains in the city of Lakesh also matched up to ancient Egyptians, right? What they termed was Egypto-Nubians. So we're seeing correlation in DNA and in the archaeological study of the skulls. So both the skulls and DNA are matching up. Both the skulls and DNA are matching up to Egyptians or Egypto-Nubians. But they didn't just stop at the Egyptians, right? They didn't just stop at comparing these samples against the Egyptians. They also included the modern day population of Yoruba. And they compared SF543 against the Yoruba population, and they discovered that there was a high match. You can see that as shown in red on the graph. And likewise, you can see the DNA sample highlighted L0. If you don't know, L0 is one of the DNA groups associated with the so-called African American woman. And the DNA groups associated with the African American woman are L0, L1, L2, and L3. And again, when we look at these reports, we can see L0, L1, L2, or L3. Now, an interesting discovery associated with the DNA has to do with the timing of the matches. Now, remember, these archaeological sites have specific dates that they're associated with. And what we found was that the DNA matches of the so-called African American only matches during a certain timeline, during a specific timeline, which matches up with the history of the Jews in Spain and Portugal. But in this graph, I simply want to show you that E1B1A, which is the DNA of the so-called African American male, and also L0 or L1 or L2 or L3 shows up in these ancient remains that are found in either Spain and Portugal or in Israel or in Lebanon. Now, this particular graph has to do with the DNA that was found in Spain and Portugal, right? And I believe this is specifically the DNA that was found in Granada, Spain, right? So on the very bottom, you'll see that there is a timeline, a couple of timelines. On the bottom right, it's 10th to 16th century. And it's important that you know that the Moors conquered Spain in the 711 AD, and they were expelled in 1492, where the Visigoths and the Goths completely took over Spain. Why is that important? Well, that explains the reason why you see this assortment of DNA haplogroups in Granada, Spain. But the one I have highlighted that is E1B-M291, so on the kind of sort of on the bottom right, that is E1B1A. It's just another name for E1B1A. If you look over to the right, you'll see a yellow line with an L2 on the top. And remember, that's the haplogroup of the African American woman, L2, found in Granada, Spain, right? All right, fam. Well, let's review. If you want to know your true identity using your DNA, simply compare your DNA to ancient DNA. And that's ancient DNA that's extracted from archaeological sites around the world. And if by chance your DNA matches archaeological sites, let's say, for instance, in Israel or in Lebanon, or even in Spain and Portugal, then you know definitively, using DNA, that your forefathers were there. Hallelujah. All right, fam. In this next section, we're going to take a look at the timing of the brews in Spain and Portugal. In other words, we're going to see if the DNA reports that we're getting out of My True Ancestry confirms or matches up with the oral history of the brews in Spain and Portugal, which tells that they arrived in Spain and Portugal from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which is around 596 BC. So let's first take a look at the accounts of the brews arriving in Spain and Portugal. As the following reference reads, the Spanish Jews are the true descendants of the tribe of Judah and the royal house of David, and were settled in Spain from the time of the captivity of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar. Hallelujah. All right, so the Spanish and Portuguese brews are descendant from the tribe of Judah, according to their oral history. And the next reference reads, the rabbinic dialect was principally formed in the Middle Ages among the Spanish Jews, who were chiefly descendant from the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And the next reference reads, Spain seems to have possessed the most considerable families who were accustomed to look down with pride on their poorer brethren, asserting that they alone had preserved their genealogical distinctions and that the blood of the royal house of David flowed in their veins. Hallelujah. All right, and here's another important part about Spain and specifically about the city of Granada. Now, what most people don't know, or what I would say that most people don't know, is that the city of Granada was actually given to the Jews by the Moors. So when the Moors conquered Spain and Portugal, they gave the brews the city of Granada. And as the following reference reads, Granada was entrusted to the Jews alone. And for this reason, it came to be known at the commencement of the Arab dominion in Spain by the name of Jewstown. Now, the significance of Jewstown is that when many so-called African Americans run their DNA in mytrueancestry.com, they are getting matches, or you guessed it, Jewstown. They're matching ancient DNA in Jewstown. Not only that, because it is an archaeological site, they know exactly the time frame of that site, which is around 950 AD, which is before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. And because of the artifacts found in those sites, they know that those sites were related to the Moors and by default related to the Bruise. Hallelujah. All right. Well, let's take a look at the timing, because remember, according to the Bruise didn't arrive in Spain and Portugal until the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which is around 596 BC. So on your screen, you're looking at a map of the Neolithic age archaeological sites for my DNA. And if you notice, I don't have any matches during the Neolithic age. And what this means is that before 596 BC, I don't have a match, right? And this matches up with the history of the Bruise in that area. But if you advance to the next age, which is the Roman age, then I have a match in Spain and Portugal, and in particular in the Granada area. Now, notice that in Spain and Portugal, according to the history of the Bruise, the first wave was placed in Spain and Portugal around 596 AD, associated with the conquest of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. And also there was a second wave that was associated when the Romans conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that was General Titus. And according to the history, General Titus also sent some Jews or Bruise over to Spain and Portugal. So after both of these waves of Bruise came into Spain and Portugal, this is when you'll start to see matches for the so-called African American in Spain and Portugal. So again, use your own DNA. And like I said, if your DNA matches, these sites over in Spain and Portugal after the time of Nebuchadnezzar and is matching specifically in Jewstown, that's just additional proof of who you are. Hallelujah. And so just like we can see the matching of the archaeological sites over time, matching up or lining up with the history of the Bruise in Spain and Portugal, we also find an interesting pattern in Africa as far as the matching of the archaeological sites in Africa. Let's take a closer look. And so on your screen, you're looking at a similar map of the map of Africa during the Neolithic age. Now notice very little matches in Africa during the Neolithic age, right? As far as our DNA matching archaeological sites. However, when we advance through time, we start seeing matches in Africa, but they're in East Africa, right? Our first matches, according to these old ancient archaeological sites where the DNA from these human remains are being exhumed, we're matching these archaeological sites not in West Africa, but in East Africa. That's important. And you can also see, if you take a look, I know we're zoomed out, but you'll also see matches in Israel and Lebanon as well. And this is just a closer snapshot of that. So fam, the important takeaway here is that according to the ancient DNA, our oldest matches are in East Africa, not West Africa. And we have another DNA report to confirm this finding. And then once we advance further, then we start to see a match specifically over in the Nigeria area. And this too matches up with history, because according to history, Nigeria was a collection point or a gathering place for the Bruise through different dispensations or through different time periods, right? Let's take a look at a reference to illustrate this point. Africa being an accurate description of regions, and it reads, many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled thither from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians. And what you'll notice there, fam, is that each of those events occurred at different periods of time, right? But according to this reference, these Bruise were gathering around the river Niger. All right, so the river Niger was a gathering place for these different waves of Bruise from Jerusalem. All right. So according to our map, this is when we start to see matches over in West Africa, specifically in Nigeria. However, when we advance our timeline to the Iron Age, this is when we start to see matches in Spain and Portugal, because remember, they were taking over to Spain and Portugal. And we also start to see matches further south in Africa, right? But family, what you should notice is that we aren't seeing a whole lot of matches in West Africa. Why don't we see a whole lot of matches in Central Africa or West Africa? Well, the transatlantic slave trade at this time hadn't started yet. However, when we advanced our timeline, then we start to match old ancient archaeological sites in places like the Congo, right? You'll see it has a date there of 1750 AD. So what can we learn from this DNA report using ancient DNA? Well, we learn that according to ancient DNA, our roots are in East Africa, right? Which then move towards the south and then move towards the west. And also another confirmation of this has to do with a DNA terminology called genetic distance. And if you don't know, genetic distance simply refers to how close your DNA matches someone else's DNA. And when we compare the so-called African Americans' DNA with various tribes in West Africa, with various tribes in Central Africa, with various tribes in South Africa, what we found was that the so-called African Americans' DNA, their closest genetic relative wasn't in West Africa. It wasn't in Central Africa. The so-called African Americans' closest genetic distance relative was in Southeast Africa to a tribe called the Lemba. So this also proves that you, so-called African American, you came from someplace else, right? Because your DNA is a little bit different than the tribes that are in that area, right? You're matching the Lemba, and of course, we're not going to get into it much in this study, but we know that the Lemba's oral traditions say that they came from Jerusalem. And so your DNA matches the group that have an oral tradition saying that they came from Jerusalem. Hallelujah, right? And remember, the brews of Spain and Portugal said that they too came from Jerusalem, right? So your DNA, if you're getting matches in Spain and Portugal, and you're getting matches with the Lemba, your DNA is confirming the history that we're finding in these old books. Hallelujah. And what you're seeing on the screen is just a report from my true ancestry of the genetic distance values. And of course, the lower the value, the closer you are to that specific group. And you'll see the number one group that so-called African Americans are closest to is Lemba. Now, this report is my report, but if you decide to upload your DNA to my true ancestry, go and take a look at your modern day population to see if Lemba is also your closest modern day population, according to the genetic distance value. But I do want to point out that the Lemba aren't the closest tribe that we are related to. There is another tribe that is a tribe in Kenya. There's a tribe in Kenya that we're even closer related to than the Lemba. And if, again, this goes all the way back to history, right? Because there are tribes in Kenya that are related to the Lemba. And as we stated, so-called African Americans are extremely close in genetic distance value to this tribe in Kenya as well. So again, fam, this is again pointing and confirming that according to DNA, our ancestry is in East Africa, right? South Africa with the Lemba, East Africa in Kenya, and we're getting closer and closer to the homeland of Israel. So maybe you're thinking, well, in some of these reports, I saw different groups. I saw haplogroup J. I saw haplogroup E1B1B. I saw haplogroup R1B or E1B1A. Which one of these groups are the brews? How can we prove which one of these groups are the brews? And it's easy. All we have to do is take a look at history to see where these brews migrated to or went in great numbers. And then we'll go to those places where the brews went to see which one of those haplogroups are there in great numbers. Will we find haplogroup J there in great numbers? Will we find haplogroup E1B1B there in great numbers? Or will we find haplogroup R1B there in great numbers, or E1B1A? Whichever group is there in great numbers, according to the old references, are the brews according to DNA. Hallelujah. For example, in this particular reference, it says, Barbet states that in the reign of King John II, in about the close of the 15th century, large numbers of brews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea. So we are going to be looking at the coast of southern Guinea, where the Portuguese went to see who's there in great numbers. But let's take a look at another reference, and it reads, the first design of settling there was in the year 1486, but perceiving how many perished in the attempt, in that they could better agree with that of the continent on the coast of Guinea, It was resolved by King John II of Portugal that all the Jews within his dominion, which were vastly numerous, so we're talking about a lot of these brews, hundreds of thousands of brews, right, should be obliged to receive baptism or upon refusal be transported to the coast of Guinea. Listen, it says, where the Portuguese had already several considerable settlements and a good trade considering the time since its first discovery. We're zooming in, we're keying in on the place where the Portuguese already had considerable settlements. That's where these brews were sent to. So we're going to be looking at the maps to see which one of those groups are there in great numbers according to DNA. And here's another reference which reads, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, or the Negro Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, who are despised even by the very Negro, are descended. All right, so again, we're seeing that the brews were banished. They were sent. And it says, to other Portuguese settlements, right? I'm focusing on that, fam. Because what I want you to understand is that these brews went to a specific place, to Portuguese settlements. And the Portuguese settlements were in a specific place, especially in the 14th century or the 1400s and the 1500s, right? They were in a specific place, right? And we're going to take a look at that here in the following slides. But just know that they were there in the area of Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. Initially, those were the places where the Portuguese settled. Let's take a look to see whose DNA was there in great numbers. But before we do that, let's take a look at one more reference, and it reads, in 1622, the Cape Verdean governor, Don Francisco, reported to the Portuguese king that the Guinea coastal rivers were full of Jews who were masters of the local regions and were quite independent of the crown. And again, this one is also referring to the area of Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. We're going to skip this next reference, and we're going to take a look at the frequency or the concentration of E1B1A. What we discovered was that out of all those haplogroups, there was only one haplogroup that had high concentration in the area of the Portuguese settlements. I'll say that again. What we discovered was that there was only one DNA haplogroup that had high concentration in the Portuguese settlements where the brews were sent to. And you guessed it, it was E1B1A. On your screen, what you're looking at is a map of the concentration of E1B1A in Africa. And essentially, E1B1A is mostly concentrated, or the highest concentration is just in two places. The first place that E1B1A is highly concentrated is in the area of Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, which was the location of the Portuguese settlements where the brews were placed there in great numbers. Hallelujah. The second place where you can find E1B1A in Africa in great numbers can be found in a place or location called the Kingdom of Judah. And not just the Kingdom of Judah, but also places just to the north of the Kingdom of Judah. And we will see why E1B1A is also found in high concentrations just to the north of the Kingdom of Judah. Now, on your map, you're looking at a map of the Kingdom of Judah. This is a French map, and you'll see three green circles. The bottom circle represents the Kingdom of Judah. You'll see where it says, duh, Judah, right? And then the second circle, or the next circle above the Kingdom of Judah, you'll see where it says Lamb, right? And then the third circle above Lamb represents country of Bambara, or it says country of Bambaras. So if you're wondering what's the common denominator between those three locations or those three areas are associated with the tribe or the Kingdom of Judah. And here is yet another map showing that Bambara is indeed above the location of the Kingdom of Judah. But let's take a look, because so we had those three areas, right? We have the Kingdom of Judah, which we have references which show that the Kingdom of Judah was indeed inhabited by Jews. But what about the area of Lamb? Remember, we had those three green circles? So the second green circle above the Kingdom of Judah was called Lamb. Let's read about Lamb. And it says, inhabitants, according to the accounts of the people of the neighboring countries, the natives of Lamb are Jews, right? The native of Lamb are Jews, right? Now, let's take a look at Bambra. So we know that the kingdom of Judah is inhabited with Jews. We read that the natives of Lamb were called Jews. What about Bambra? And it reads, a Jew who had accompanied a German traveler as far as Timbuktu found near the boundary of the kingdom of Bambra a large number of Jewish Negroes. See that, fam? A large number of Jewish Negroes. Nearly every family among them possesses the law of Moses written upon parchment. And so remember when we took a look at that map, right? That map showing the concentration of E1B1A in Africa. One of the locations of the highest concentrations of E1B1A was the location of Bambra, where a large number of Jewish Negroes resided. And so that's where your DNA is found in the highest concentration in Africa. All right, fam. And so here's a picture of the concentration of E1B1A. Once again, and you can see this matches up with history, fam. This matches up with history. And this also proves that out of all those different DNA haplogroups that we saw, whether it be J or E1B1B or R1B, the only group out of all those groups that match up according to history is E1B1A, thus confirming that we are the children of Judah, that we are from the house of Judah.
The African Israelite Justice Foundation is not your usual legal practice. You see, we focus primarily on cases involving injustice against African Israelite groups or injustice against individuals because he or she identifies as an African Israelite or an Israelite of African descent. In other words, we are not a general legal practice. Instead, we specialize on African Israelite cases. And also, family, please keep in mind, we are a brand new organization, not affiliated with any existing organizations. However, it is our hope to establish connections with all African Israelite groups and people here in the States and around the world. Family, we need to hear your stories of injustice so that we can begin to record, investigate, and identify the enemies of Israel hiding behind the veil, and then ultimately hold them accountable in a court of law. And as stated before, we are a brand new organization with limited funds. And we are in the process of expanding our resources to further enhance our legal team, who will litigate our cases. And if you would like to join this historic cause, please share this message all over social media. Spread this message of IsraeliteJustice.org worldwide. And get this message from Kyrie to Kanye, from Whoopi Goldberg to Nick Cannon. And also share your stories of injustice or donate to the cause. And if you so choose to, you can remain anonymous and let us do all the work. After all, that's what the Israelite Justice Foundation is here for. We are here to fight for your right to be Israel. As always, thank you in advance. We appreciate you and love you, Israel. Take care, family. Shalom.
Well, you got it down, man. They can breathe at least, man. I've been trying to help out. So you can breathe a little bit more.
Apparently the cold weather is setting in, and that means more people will be indoors and there is more chance of coronavirus to spread. And in recent days, We now know from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington.
More than 30% of Americans have not made their full housing payments for July, including 19% who made no housing payments at all.
Now to the wildfires raging in the West, which have killed at least 33 people, with dozens of others missing and tens of thousands more forced to flee their homes in California, Oregon, and Washington.
Australia is on fire.
The coronavirus has claimed a Ukrainian passenger plane.
Violent clashes between Hindus and Muslims.
The economy is facing its biggest crisis.
A Pakistan International Airline.
Worst plague of locusts.
2 weeks after George Floyd was
India's disputed border.
Open it! No, I don't know what's going on. Okay, stop the car! Stop! Stop! Okay, I'm getting out. I'm getting out.
The Jews. The Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain shows itself occasionally with the curly hair, the long eye, and proportions of the skull. The Jewish hybrids with the Negro in Jamaica and Guyana reproduce most strikingly the Assyrian type. You see, Jews were called Negro, which is the Spanish and Portuguese word for black. Both Spanish and Portuguese Jews were called black Jews. For example, in this quote it reads, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called. It reads, thus the black color is found not only in individuals, as the Black Jews of Portugal. And it reads, "'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who marrying always among one another, beget children like themselves, and consequently the swarthiness of their is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions." Now notice how first-hand accounts line up with Bible verses, such as Lamentations chapter 5, verse 10, where it reads, "Our skin is black like another, because of the terrible famine." Now, not only did Europeans refer to the Jews as black, Arabs also referred to the Jews as black. Now, the Arab word for black is referred to as Sudan, S-U-D-A-N. The following references read, the Arabic word for blacks is Sudan. And then the reference at the bottom reads, they call it Balad Sudan, which means land of the blacks. Sudan is the Arabic word for black person. Now notice that Sudan is spelled two different ways. S-U-D-A-N is the modern day spelling. However, the antiquity spelling was S-O-U-D-A-N, so Udan, which is simply two words combined into one, so Udan. Now, let's use Google Translate to look up the meaning of the words so Udan. Now, we will use Hausa language, which is located in the So Udan, to translate the word Udan. Now, let's take a quick look at the Hebrew meaning of the words so Udan. After all, Hebrew is the native tongue of the Jews. To do this, we will start with Strong's Concordance H5471. That's Strong's word H5471, which is so. And if we look at the definition of the word so, it reads of foreign origin. That's of foreign origin. And if we put that together, we look at the Hebrew translation. So means foreigner or of foreign origin. And Udan equals Judah, which is H3063, which represents the southern kingdom. And if you put the two together, you get foreigners of Judah. So on our map, we have So Udan, which in Hebrew represents the foreigners of Judah. Now, let's cross-check our Google translation findings using additional references. For example, the index in the back of the Talmud, Volume 3, reads, Udan, a variant of Judah in the 4th century. And our next reference reads, Udan equals Judah. Now, let's take a look at additional references to see exactly who lived in the So Udan. The Jews. The Jews of So Udan are, according to my informers, divided into many large and small tribes, with whose names they are unacquainted. Their mode of life in some countries is pastoral. But the towns are filled with traders and artificers of that faith, who gain a substance at their several employments in the service of the Muslims, under whose government they live as vassals. This in reference to Mr. Bodwich's kingdom of Yehudi. I may be permitted to say, is the only state of society in which that oppressed nation is suffered to live. And the tribes without security in their possessions, without public revenue or arms, are hourly exposed to insult and rampant form of blind zeal and active bigotry
by which their lords are animated in those countries, the lands occupied by those people cover a wide extent between Messina and Cavi. They are said to be mingled also with the Upper Fula tribes, eastward of Timbuktu, and in many parts of Meroe. They have inheritance or are employed as artificers in the cities and towns. As we live among the heathens, says Bashar, so do the Jews in Meroe and Fulani with our brethren, but they are not esteemed like us. For they are a people hardened in their sins and obstinate in their fidelity. The anger of Yah is upon them, and therefore are they given to the rule of the Muslims. The Arab Bashar goes on to describe the Jews as brown colored instead of the black color of the Ashanti. The Arabic word Soudan and the word Negro, which is the Portuguese and Spanish word for black, were bywords that were used to describe the Jews or the house or tribe of Judah. Now, this was foretold in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 37, where it reads, "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whether Yah shall lead thee." Now, we will discuss another byword for the Jews, or for the house of Judah. It's one of the more controversial bywords. It's a byword that today causes hurt and pain and often great sadness. However, this controversial byword can be used to identify the true identity of the so-called African American today. The byword is spelled Nigger. It was a byword used to identify slaves that were captured in the Niger Delta region. However, Niger is a relatively modern pronunciation of the word. During the time of antiquity, it was pronounced nigger. Now, the New World Encyclopedia tells us that the Portuguese arrived at the Niger Delta on the coast in 1473. By the 17th century, coastal trade had supplanted the trans-Saharan trade, mostly dealing in slaves. During the years when the slave trade flourished, nearly half the total number of slaves exported from Africa came from the Niger Delta, which came to be known as the Slave Coast. Next, let's read about the people that were taken as slaves who lived in the Niger River region. This next reference comes from John Ogilvy of London, who was the official cosmographer and geographic printer of King Charles. And it reads, "Many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger." Others are Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such came out of Europe, whence they were banished out of parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Countries in 1350, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. These all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks that they are not permitted to be Mohammedans unless first baptized.
and then no otherwise made use of than to receive their customs and to gather their taxes. Skipping to the bottom paragraph, it reads, the idolaters are numerous in Negro land, Upper and Lower Ethiopia, and towards the great ocean, except, as we hinted before, some few who by the industry of the Portuguese and the Spain have been converted and baptized in several places. In case you're wondering, who are these black Jews living in the Niger River Delta region on the west coast of Africa? We need look no further than another book authorized by the official cosmographer and geographic printer of King Charles himself. This comes from a book called America, An Accurate Description of the New World by John Ogilvie. On page 574, it reads that John III, King of Portugal, sent a colony thither above 200 years before, whom though the unwholesome air destroyed, yet the place was not left desolate. For he sent new inhabitants, who first settled Guinea, next in Angola, and lastly on the island of St. Thomas, that so they might be better used to the air. That the said king sold all those Jews for slaves that refused to embrace the Roman religion, and caused their children to be baptized, from whom, coming thither in great numbers, most of the present inhabitants were descended. So according to John Ogilvie of London, the children of the Jews that refused to embrace the Roman religion were placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers, most of which the present inhabitants were descended. In being baptized, a mark was placed on their hands and on their foreheads. As we read, the cardinals that was to obfuscate being come with the canons of that church. The ceremony was begun with blessing the water. After the proselytes, presented by their godfathers, advanced everyone in his turn and declared their desire to be baptized. Then they leaned over the front. The cardinal baptized them, pouring water on their foreheads out of a large silver spoon, and gave them their names. According to the cosmographer and geographic printer of the king, along with additional references, the black Portuguese and Spanish Jews were placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers. Now, let's look at additional references to see why the Jews were placed on the west coast of Africa. The Jews and Moors in Spain, page 214, and it reads, the king's creed awoke again simultaneously with the reawakening of his greed. He issued an edict which threw even that of Torquemada in the shade. All Jewish children below 14 years of age were torn from their parents' arms, dragged into the church, baptized. Those under 3 years of age were given to Christians to receive a Christian education, or in other words, to be raised as slaves. Those between 3 and 10 years of age were put on board of a ship, conveyed to the newly discovered unwholesome island of St. Thomas, called the Isles of, which was colonized by Portuguese condemned criminals, or Portuguese Jews, condemned by the Inquisition, to fare there as best they could. Those between 10 and 14 years were sold as slaves. Then indeed the cup of their affliction was full to the brim. It was a stern truth in which Lemieux uttered when he said, "The Jews have experienced fully the unequal skill of the church in administering pain. Mothers cast themselves at the feet of the tyrants and pitifully begged to be taken with their babies. They were heartlessly thrust aside. Hundreds of mothers, mad with despair, ran behind the ships as they carried off the idols of their heart and perished in the waves. The serene fortitude which the exiled people had borne so many and such grievous calamities gave way at last and was replaced by the wildest paroxysms of despair. Piercing shrieks of anguish filled the land. Childless and heartbroken and brokenhearted, they now sought to leave the land, but they were told that they had forfeited their right, and they were given the choice between baptism and slavery. Thousands, after enduring all that they did, after leaving the beloved Spain and all their wealth and ease, submitted to baptism now, in the hope of being reunited with their children. Thousands were sold as slaves. Yet, prior to being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, outrageous too revolting, too repulsive, too heartrending to be here narrated. Now, to pause here just for a moment, just keep in mind that these were Black, Portuguese, and Spanish Jews, as the previous references have pointed out. All right, as we continue, terror seized upon the native Portuguese Jews when they helplessly beheld the cruelties to which their Spanish brethren were subjected. They knew then themselves could not escape the wrath of the church much longer. They thought of flight, and well had it been for them had they made their escape then. While they were making secret preparations, John II died, 1495. He had been afflicted on the very day when the ships laden with the Jewish exile children set sail for the isle of the condemned criminals with a strange, painful malady, and had lingered ever since. So King John II, who shipped the children of the Jews to the west coast of Africa, became sick the very day that the ships departed from Portugal. Let's keep reading. It says, his own promising son and successor preceded him into the grave. His cousin Manuel ascended the throne. He was the counterpart of his predecessor, kind-hearted, a promoter of learning, eager to further the interests of his country by discoveries abroad and by commerce at home. Immediately, he disenfranchised the Jewish exiles sold into slavery, promised to recall the condemned children, and issued an edict in which he commanded kind treatment to the Jews and prohibited actions against them. In their great joy, the native Portuguese Jews sent an embassy to him, offering him large sums of money voluntarily as a token of their gratitude. The king thanked them, reassured them of his goodwill, but refused to be paid for human kindness. But again had destiny decreed that a woman was to play an ignoble part in the tragic history of the Jews. A marriage was proposed between Manuel of Portugal and the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain. Manuel was rejoiced with the proposal. Already he saw himself in the near future king of united Spain and Portugal and of the entire New World. But Satan stepped between, dipped his pen in gall in writing the marriage contract,
demanded as one of the conditions the immediate expulsion from Portugal of all the Jews, both natives, which is the Portuguese, and exiles, which were the Spanish. The king hesitated. The fanatical daughter of the fanatical parents persisted. Argument made her more vehement. Torquemada might as well be proud of his pupil. The possession of vast empires and of the most powerful crown of Europe tempted and the temper conquered. He had purchased his right to the princess of Spain at a sacrifice of thousands and thousands of lives, and with the destruction of the very pillars of his nation's prosperity. On the 30th of November, 1497, the marriage contract was signed. And on the 20th of the following month appeared the edict of the expulsion of the Jews from Portugal. The scene of mourning and wailing, heartrending cries which resounded in Spain re-echoed in Portugal, only the more painful because of the terrible knowledge that they had since acquired of the meaning of the word expulsion. Manuel soon regretted his signing away his most industrious, most intelligent, and most prosperous citizens, but the marriage contract held him fast, and the Spanish queen kept a watchful eye on him and Torquemada upon both. The prospective vast empire and Spanish crown still dazzled his eyes. He planned a strategy. He thought he could force the parents to embrace Christianity and to remain if he once succeeded in getting all their children into his power and into the Christian faith. He gave secret orders for the repetition of the atrocious crime of having all children under 14 years of age seized from their mother's bosom and father's arm, dispersed through the kingdom to be baptized, and brought up as Christians. The secret became known. Portugal again re-echoed the wails of stricken ones. Frantic mothers threw their children into deep wells or rivers. Mothers were known to take their babies from their breasts and tear them limb from limb, rather than resign them to Christians. They would rather know the bodies of their children in the grave and their released spirit in heaven than have them adopt a faith into which Satan sent his friends. With all the parents' opposition, the king's order was executed. Many accepted baptism, but not enough to please the king, and to wreak vengeance upon them for thwarting his wishes. He revoked his edict, seized all who had not yet fled, and sold them for slaves. What happened to the children? What happened to the children? What became of the children of these rebellious Jews that refused to embrace the Roman religion? What became of the children of the Jews that sacrificed their lives, and in some cases, their children, to make a stand for the laws, statutes, and commandments and their belief in the Most High? What became of those children? In order to answer this question, we need to look no further than the ones who enslaved the children themselves. But we first need to understand that the Jews of Spain and Portugal claim their descent from the tribe of Judah. As the following reference reads, it says, the Spanish and the Portuguese Jews claim their descent from
the tribe of Judah. And with that in mind, the slavers who took the children and carried the children to the west coast of Africa named the place that they sent the children after the children. On the west coast of Africa, the Portuguese slavers named the slave coast the Kingdom of Judah. And the next reference also confirms that the children that were taken to the west coast of Africa resided in the Kingdom of Judah. As the following quote reads, it reads, Judah or Judah is a city old, frequented since the 16th century by the Portuguese slavers who gave it its name. Its inhabitants were said to be Judaic, and they were indeed considered as a remnant of the scattered tribes of Israel. And the next quote reads, east of the Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Gliwice, known to Europeans by various names of Fida, Hueda, Wida, Wida. The old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river, Alala, whose real name was Ephraim, during the flourishing days of the slave coast, from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from a Jew, as the Portuguese called this place. All right, so let's do a brief recap of what we've learned so far. We learned that the Portuguese shipped the children of the rebellious house of Judah, or the tribe of Judah, who refused to embrace the Roman religion. These children were sent or shipped to the west coast of Africa in great numbers. We also learned that the Portuguese named the place that they sent the children of the house or tribe of Judah to. These Portuguese named the place after the children. They named the place the Kingdom of Judah. And we also learned that these children were raised to be Christians and to be slaves. Now, let's cross-check our findings using additional references. Now, previous references show the king of Portugal taking all the children of the rebellious house or tribe of Judah from the ages of 14 years of age and younger to be raised as Christians and slaves. However, additional references show this age was later increased to children in their 20s. For example, in this reference, the Jews of Spain and Portugal and the Inquisition, it reads, a fresh edict went forth that all the children between the ages of 14 and 20 should also be taken from their parents and baptized, and multitudes were dragged forcibly by their hair and by their arms into the churches and compelled to receive the waters of baptism, together with new names being afterwards given over to those who undertook to instruct them in the Christian faith.
All right. As always, family, thank you for taking the time to watch and share these videos.
Esau, arguably the second greatest biblical villain of all times, second only to Satan himself. Esau's hatred for his brother Jacob lasted for thousands of years, and it continues to this very day. He is Israel's number one enemy, primary persecutor, the one who has a perpetual hatred for his own brother, Jacob. His hatred for his brother and for the Most High Yah has earned him a special place in Yah's judgment. Esau's the only race which has an entire book of the Bible dedicated to his destruction by the hands of the Messiah himself, the book of Obadiah. Esau is the king of evil, and sometimes referred to in scripture as Satan himself. Let's uncover Esau's dark past by first starting at the beginning, by starting at the blessing that was sold for a bowl of soup. Let's begin in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 34, where Esau sells his birthright to Jacob by an oath. And when the time came for him to receive his birthright blessing from his father, Isaac, he did not tell his father that he had sold it. Instead, he attempted to break his oath and take the blessing for himself. However, Jacob, with the help of his mother, tricked Isaac into rightfully giving the blessing to Jacob. And when Esau learned of this trickery, he was furious. And it reads, "And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, my father. And he said, Thy brother came with subtlety, and has taken away your blessing." Verse 38, "And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion, and thou shalt break his yoke off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob." Hebrews 12, verse 16. "Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. Esau was rejected by the Most High Yah and found no place of repentance. Instead, Esau made himself to be the chief enemy of the Most High Yah and his people. Keep not thou silent, O Yah. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Yah. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom. Esau would go on to live in a place called Idumea, Basra, Uz, Mount Seir, and Petra. And from there, he would go on to spread his seed around the world, according to prophecy. And according to prophecy and DNA, we know that Esau would go on to mix his seed throughout the earth, hiding in plain sight in every nation. In order to find Esau today, we need to look at the various names used throughout the Bible to identify Esau, such as Edom, or by the names of his descendants. Genesis chapter 25, verse 30 reads, And Esau said unto Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. Esau was also called by the title Duke. In fact, he was the very first to carry that title. Genesis chapter 36, verse 15 reads, These were the dukes of the sons of Esau, the sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn son of Esau, Duke Teman, Duke Omar, Duke Zepho, Duke Kenaz. Notable dukes were Zepho, who conquered Kittim, which is Greece, and Amalek, father of the Amalekites. Jasher, chapter 64, verse 25 reads, And Zepho, the son of Eliphaz, the son of Esau, king of Kittim, or Greece. Jasher, chapter 90, verse 30 reads, Edom became one kingdom with the children of Kittim all the days. The dukes of Esau mixed themselves with the seed of Japhet in Greece. Two nations mixed together under one kingdom called Greece. Not only did Esau's dukes live in Greece, they also lived in Basra, in Mount Seir. It's here we find Esau mixing his seed with a mysterious people. You see, in Mount Seir, there were things or beings referred to in the Bible as giants or Nephilim. They were given the following names in the Bible. The Rephaim, which is Strong's 87497, which means, paradoxically, it could mean dead or ghosts. The Zuzim, Strong's 82104, meaning roving beast. The Emim, Strong's 8368, means terrors. Or the Horites, Strong's 82752, means cave dwellers, whom mixed his seed with. These beings lived in Mount Seir, were not descendants from Noah. Then the question would be, if they're not descendants from Noah, then whose seed are they? Who else had a seed upon the earth other than Noah? Genesis chapter 3, verse 14 reads, And Yah said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Regarding Genesis chapter 3, we see that Eve has a literal, physical seed, and therefore the serpent would also have a literal, physical seed as well. You see, Esau mixed himself with a mysterious group called the Horites in Mount Seir. The word Horite means cave dwellers, and the word Seir means hairy and shaggy. Esau mixed his seed with the people we would call today cavemen, and scientists refer to cavemen as Neanderthals. Traits such as long, shaggy hair, pale skin are traits passed down by the Neanderthals to humans. It's a scientific fact that humans and Neanderthals interbred first in the area called the Middle East today. Genesis chapter 36, verse 19 reads, These are the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these are their dukes. These are the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land, Lotan, and Shobal, and Zebeon, and Anna, and Dishon, and Ezer, and Dishon. These are the dukes of the Horites, the children of Seir, in the land of Edom. Jeremiah 49 verse 10 reads, But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. Just like the Horites, Esau began living in caves in the cliffs of the rock. Esau's seed was indeed spoiled. His seed mixed with Horite, cavemen, along with other races of men upon the earth. Ironically, scientists also confirm mixing between Neanderthals and humans first occurred in the Middle East. They also confirmed pale skin, red and blonde hair came as a result of mixing with Neanderthals. If so, then where did Esau's red hair come from? Neanderthals were red and hairy, and Esau was red and hairy. Genesis chapter 25, verse 25 reads, And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. According to scientific studies, DNA mutations for blonde or red hair were not found in ancient Europe before the Bronze Age. The article goes on to state, and I quote, It seems that fair skin and blonde or red hair were originally passed on to Homo sapiens in the Middle East or Central Asia, rather than in Europe, end quote. All right, well, let's review. Esau sold his blessing for a bowl of soup. He became the enemy of Yisrael and the Most High Yah, and he was the first dukes upon the earth. And last but not least, he mixed his seed with Horite cavemen in Mount Seir. Again, a people who don't descend from Noah. which implies Horites descend from the seed of the serpent. The Nephilim, also referred to as the giants, also referred to as the Raphaim, which can paradoxically mean dead or ghost-like, a wraith, or the Zuzim, which means roving beast, or the Emin, which means terrors. All of these Nephilim lived in the area of Mount Seir, alongside the Horim, or the Horites, south of the Dead Sea. Esau's descendants who fled into Greece brought their building practices with them. As you can see, buildings in Greece match Esau's buildings found in Petra. And Esau's buildings in Petra match Esau's buildings in Rome. This is yet more proof that Esau mixed with Greece, who mixed with Rome. Joel chapter 3, verse 4 reads, "Oh, what have you to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? And if you recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head. The children of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold unto the Grecians, that you might remove them far from their border." Now note that Joel 3 states that Tyre sold Judah to the Greeks. However, the book of Amos words it a little differently. Now Amos chapter 1 verse 9 reads, "Thus saith Yah, for 3 transgression of Tyre and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have delivered or sold up the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant." The book of Joel states that Tyre sold Judah to Greece.
In regards to Esau or Edom being Rome, many historians have associated with Edom being Rome. Here are a few examples.
Esau's association with Rome is significant because according to prophecy, the Messiah will destroy the divided nation of Rome. Take the book of Daniel, for example, and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, dreamed of a statue whose head of gold represented the literal nation of Babylon. The chest of silver represented the literal nation of the Persians and the Medes. And the belly and the thighs of bronze represented the literal nation of Greece. And the legs of iron represented the literal nation of Rome. And the feet and the 10 toes mixed with the iron of Rome represents divided Rome. In fact, Rome was divided into 10 kingdoms, which would later become known as Europe. Now, according to this prophecy, the stone, which is uncut, which represents the Messiah, will rise up and strike and destroy the literal nations of Europe. Divided Rome. It's the Messiah against Europe. Esau created a Roman version of Christianity, a version which forced the children of Israel to break the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High Yah. Esau also used similar tactics in Judaism and Islam. In Judaism, it was King Herod who attempted to get the children of Israel to become lawless. Now, to pull this off, King Herod replaced the priest and the leaders with Edomites in an attempt to get Judah to break the Most High's laws.
And it reads, after Herod had destroyed the greatest part of his supposed enemies, he began to exhibit a marked contempt for the Jewish religion and laws. From the beginning of his reign to the final destruction of the temple, the high priests had no hereditary right, but were set up and removed at his pleasure and that of his successors. He also destroyed the authority of the Grand Sanhedrin and burnt the Jewish records that he might be thought originally as an Israelite.
It's important to note that Esau was made a Jew between the book of Malachi and the book of Matthew. In other words, just before the time of the New Testament, thanks to the efforts of King Herod and John Hyrcanus, Esau was made a Jew. With that in mind, we need to keep in mind that during the New Testament, there were two Jews in Jerusalem. There were the Israelite Jews, who were the descendants of the children of Israel, and there were the Edomite Jews, descended from Esau, whose ancestors were never in bondage to any man. Let's look at the book of John, chapter 8, verse 31, which reads, then said Yeshua to those Jews which believed on him, if you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How says you, you shall be made free? Now notice that these Jews said that they were never in bondage to any man. Esau, or the descendants of Esau, were never in bondage to any man. However, the children of Israel were in bondage in Egypt. This is how we know that these Jews are Edomite Jews. Now, the Messiah goes on to tell these Edom Jews, whose seed is mixed with Horites, that Yeshua tells them, you are of the devil. Verse 42 reads, Yeshua said unto them, if Yah were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from Yah. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. Now note, it was Esau's descendants that plotted to kill the Messiah. Mark chapter 3, verse 6 reads, and the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians, that's King Herod, the Herodians, against him, how they might destroy them. It was these Herodian Jews of Esau's descent who were repeatedly called the devil by Christ. Revelations chapter 2, verse 9 reads, I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews, but are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Revelations chapter 3, verse 9 reads, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. The Bible, time and time again, defines Esau's descendants as being the agents of Satan after he mixes his seeds with the Horites. Revelations 12, verse 3 reads, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born." Now, the king who attempted to devour or destroy the baby Messiah as soon as he was born was none other than Esau's descendant, King Herod, the very same descendants who later plotted to kill the adult Messiah. Let's look at the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 13, which reads, "And when they were departed, behold, the angel of Yah appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the child to destroy him." And Revelations 12 calls this red dragon, who attempted to destroy the baby Messiah, the Bible calls him the devil. Herod, the descendant of Esau, is called the devil. Revelations chapter 12, verse 9 reads, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Of all the different names for Esau, one of the most condemning names is the daughter of Babylon. Esau is the daughter of Babylon. Psalms 137 verse 7 reads, "Remember, O Yah, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. Happy shall he be that rewardeth thee, as you have rewarded us." Ironically, Esau helped Babylon destroy the first temple of the Most High Yah. He then helped Rome destroy the second temple of the Most High Yah. With that in mind, it's no surprise that scriptures refers to Esau's judgment. It refers to it as the vengeance of Yah's temple. Jeremiah verse 50, verse 28 reads, "The voice of them that flee and escape out of the land of Babylon, to declare in Zion the vengeance of Yah, the vengeance of his temple." Verse 41, "Behold, a people shall come from the north, a great nation, and many kings shall be raised from the coasts of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel and will not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon the horses, everyone put in array, like a man to battle against thee, O daughter of Babylon." Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 11 reads, "Make bright the bows, gather the shields. Yah has raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, For his device is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of Yah, the vengeance of his temple. Verse 33 reads, For thus says Yah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor. It is time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest shall come. Esau is the daughter of Babylon. He's also called Babylon, and he's also called the devil, aka Lucifer. Now notice how these scriptures speak of Esau's Babylon and Satan interchangeably. Isaiah chapter 13 verse 1 reads, The burden of Babylon which Isaiah son of Amos did see. Verse 6, How ye, for the day of Yah is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Verse 12, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Thou hast said in thine heart,
I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the Lord. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth tremble, to shake the kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the houses of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, as the remnant of those that are slain, thrust through with the sword, that go down to the stones of the pits, as a carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers that do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the earth with cities. For I will raise up against them, says Yah of hosts, and cut them off from Babylon, the name, the remnant, and the son, and the nephew, says Yah. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldees, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Uncover the locks. Make bare the leg. Uncover the thigh. Pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered. Yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. As for our Redeemer, Yah of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit thou still and get thee into the darkness, O daughter of Chaldees, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into your hands. Thou did not show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid your yoke. And thou saidest, I shall be a lady forever. And so that thou did not lay these things to heart, neither did remember the latter end of it. Therefore, hear now this, thou that art given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly and say in your heart, I am and none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection, for the multitude of your sorceries, and for the great abundance of your enchantments. For thou hast trusted in your wickedness, and hast said, none seeth me. Your wisdom and your knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in your heart, I am, and none else beside me. Therefore shall evil come upon thee, and thou shalt not know from whence it rises, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to cut it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. You see, over and over again, the Most High Yah will destroy Esau, or the daughter of Babylon, in the last days. Isaiah uses different names to describe the people who will be destroyed by the Messiah in the last days. He will destroy Esau, the daughter of Babylon, using nations from the north. And he will destroy Esau living in Basra when he returns to the land of Israel. Now, in this scripture, Esau is called by his Greek name, Idumea. Come near, you nations, to hear and hearken, you people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world, and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of Yah is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them, he hath delivered them to the slaughter. Their slain also shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and the mountains shall be melted with their blood, and all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falleth from the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of Yah is filled with blood. It is made fat with the fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats, and with the fat of the kidneys of the rams. For Yah has made a sacrifice in Basra, and a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and dust made fat with the fatness. For it is the day of Yah's vengeance, and the year of recompense for the controversy of Zion. Isaiah chapter 63, verse 1 reads, Who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength, I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, thy garments like him that treadeth the vine fat? I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury. And their blood shall be sprinkled upon mine garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeeming is come. Hear the word of Yah, you that tremble at his word. Your brethren that hated you, that cast you out for my name's sake, said, Let Yah be glorified, but he shall appear to your joy, and they shall be ashamed. A voice of noise came from the city, a voice from the temple, a voice of Yah that rendereth recompense to his enemies. Before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such a thing? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the birth, and not cause to bring forth, saith Yah? Shall I cause to bring forth, and shut up the womb, saith Yah? Rejoice you in Jerusalem, and be glad with her, and all you that love her. Rejoice for joy with her, and all you that mourn for her, that you may suck and be satisfied with the breast of her consolations, that you may milk out and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus saith Yah, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then shall you suck, and you shall be borne upon her sides, and be dandled upon her knees. As one whom his mother comforted, so will I comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Jerusalem. And when you see this, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like an herb. And the hand of Yah shall be known towards his servants, and his indignation towards his enemies. For behold, Yah will come with fire, and with his chariots like the whirlwind, to render his anger and fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will Yah plead with all flesh, and the slain of Yah shall be many. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come worship before me, saith Yah.
What is the root issue for that hatred towards our black brothers and sisters? The Lord woke me up kind of in the middle of the night, and he answered that question. And the answer was, because they're my chosen people.
In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to Jerusalem with great slaughter. Many outrages and atrocities were committed against the remainder of the people. It has been estimated that over 1 million Hebrews fled into the interiors of Africa from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Hebrew slaves.
To reconnect to your history, you need to do 3 things. 1, you need to redefine who the children of Judah are according to the old references. Not from the 1900s and newer, because those books tend to have a totally, completely different history in those books. So you have to ask yourself, how did we lose this in history? How did you lose 400,000 people in history? And the reason why I say how did you lose 400,000 people in history is not in the books.
Many people in today's time, many Israelites who don't know their heritage or who they are looking back.
Now it is up to us to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Come now and take a journey with me into this newfound crazy reality. Most people gonna think you insane, you see. Even sometimes
Deep in the shadows of the dark forest, hidden among the cragged rock along the veins of an old mountain, called by the name of Mount Seir, haunted by a race not quite human and not quite beast, but perhaps something that lies in between. Not descended from the sons of Adam nor the sons of Noah, and rumored to be born of a forbidden union, between fallen angels and the souls of men, who produced the Raphaim, the Zuzim, the Emims, and last but not least, the Horites, whose seed was mingled with men, spread wide upon the peaks of Mount Seir, and deep in the bowels of a hollow cave. You see, the Horites were the bride of Esau, who was born with a hairy red coat upon his naked skin, which forced him to seek out shelter upon the deep, long shadows of Mount Seir, where he would disappear into the darkness of the forest, far away from the reach of man, where he would dwell, bear young, hunt, and find his true love. Esau's union with the people of the mountain would have far-reaching ramifications for mankind that would last until this very day. An exchange of blood and oath would mark the descendants of this union for ages to come. You see, according to the scriptures, Esau was the only people to mix with the Horites during the times of old, therefore creating a hybrid Horite Edomite offspring who would carry the traits of both Horites and the traits of Esau, all rolled up into one new unique breed of people. And now let's take a look at the definition of the word Horite, according to the Strong's Concordance, which means cave dweller, as the following reference reads. And reads, Strong's number H2752, that's Strong's H2752, means Horims or Horites. It means cave dweller or troglodytes. You see, we can find these cave dwellers living among the descendants of Esau in Genesis chapter 36, verse 8, which reads, Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Ada, the wife of Esau; Reuel, the son of Beshemath, the wife of Esau. These are the sons of Seir the Horite, who inhabited the land: Lotan, and Shobal, and Zibeon, and Anna, and Dishan, and Ezer, and Dishan. These are the dukes of the Horites, the children of Seir in the land of Edom. These are the dukes that came of the Horites: Duke Lotan, Duke Shobal, Duke Zibeon, and Duke Anna, Duke Dishan, Duke Ezer, Duke Dishan. These are the dukes that came of Hori, among their dukes in the land of Seir. You see, fam, the Horites were divided into two groups: the East Horites and the West Horites. It was the East Horites who initially interacted with Esau, while the West Horites did not mix with Esau until later, as described in the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Horite, or perhaps cave dweller, or nobleman or son. Also Horim. Phonetically, this name is the Old Testament Hebrew equivalent of extra-biblical Hurrian. In other words, fam, it's also known as Hurrian, as the name Hurrian, which are an actual people. But we'll come back to that later. So let's drop down to the next paragraph, to the next highlighted section, which reads, These people whom we may refer to as East Horites, and who were driven out and destroyed by the Edomites, were apparently not Hurrians, On the other hand, it is thought by some that the name Horite originally stood in two places, where the Hebrew text has Hivite. Skipping ahead. So these passages would refer to a group that we may call West Horites, because they are said to reside in the region to the west of the Jordan. They are to be kept distinct from the East Horites, the predecessors of the Edomites. The West Horites, it is claimed by some, are non-Semitic, related to the peoples called Hurrians in extra-biblical texts of the 2nd millennia BC. We can also find this description of the Horites in the Bible Gateway as well, as it reads, Horites. These East Horites, the predecessors of the Edomites, were apparently not Hurrians. Where the next section reads, these Horites were called West Horites because the passages cited indicate for them a residence in the region to the west of the Jordan. And the next reference reads, the upshoot is that the Horites and Edom had become one people. In addition, the role of Edom in the exile of the 10 tribes, the continued involvement of Edom in their history needs to be kept in mind. Skipping ahead, because of the intermarriages and cultural borrowings between the Edomite families and Horites, it became the norm for their collective association. Red-headed Esau himself was hirsute, a coincidental similarity. It's important to note that both the Horite and Esau lived in the same places. Therefore, if you find the Horites, you'll more than likely find Esau. As the following reference reads, the Horites in their divisions are listed as part of Edom. In Egyptian inscriptions, the Horite land is referred to as Kar, formerly transliterated as Haran. It says, the Horites were also found in what is now northern Syria, Turkey, and Mesopotamia. Archaeological finds indicate that they spoke a language called Hurrian, similar to that later known as Urartu. According to I.M. Dekonov and S. Satorsten, the Hurrian and Urartan languages are related to the Northeast Caucasian tongues. That's important, fam. We'll come back to that later. But let's keep reading. It says, the Horites in Hebrew are referred to as Horim, or in archaeological terms as Hurrians. The Bible recalls the Horites as dwelling around Mount Seir, which was to the south of Canaan. All right, fam. So in the Bible, Mount Seir is synonymous with Esau. In other words, if you find Mount Seir, more than likely you'll find Esau's hairy descendants called Edomites. Now we note that the name Seir literally means hairy and shaggy, which is befitting of the descendants of Esau, because remember, in the scripture, Esau was described as being hairy and red. Genesis chapter 25, verse 25, which reads, and the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Now consider this. Esau was so hairy that his brother Jacob once put hairy goat skin on his neck and his arms to impersonate Esau. Think about it, fam. The hair of a goat. Now that's one red, hairy dude living on a mountain called Hairy and Shaggy, with a people called cave dwellers on Mount Seir. Now, family, did you know that there was more than one Mount Seir in the Bible, aka Hairy Mountain? In fact, there's the Mount Seir that most people are familiar with, which is located in the territory of Esau, which is also the home of the Horites. However, there's also another Mount Seir in the territory of Judah, just west of the Valley of the Rephaim, also known as the Valley of the Giants. And for this, let's take a look at the encyclopedia in the Bible Hub, which reads, number 1, The Mount and the land of Seir are alternative appellations of the mountainous tract which runs along the eastern side of Arabah, occupied by the descendants of Esau, who succeeded the ancient Horites. Number 2, which is the second Mount Seir. It reads, Seir, a landmark on the boundary of Judah. Now, let's take a look at the Smith's Bible Dictionary, which reads, Seir. It means hairy, shaggy. And number 1 reads, we have both the land of Seir, and it says, it is the original name of the mountain range extending along the east side of the valley of Arabah, from the Dead Sea to the Atlantic Gulf. And then 2, which is the second Mount Seir, it says, Mount Seir, an entirely different place from the foregoing. In other words, it's different from the first one. One of the landmarks on the north boundary of the territory of Judah. And for that, you can read Joshua chapter 15, verse 10. So as stated before, you could indeed find 2 Mount Seirs in the Bible. However, did you know that there was a third Mount Seir? One that was discovered in an unsuspecting place. That's right. That's right. This third Mount Seir, one whose people would shape the very trajectory of mankind all around the world. For this third Mount Seir is located in none other than the Caucasus Mountain. And for this, let's take a look at the Jewish Encyclopedia, and let's take a look at the definition of the word Caucasus or Caucasian. And it reads, the exact number of Caucasian Jews is not easily determined. Some of them in southern provinces have adopted the Mohammedan religion, while others in Georgia have embraced Christianity. Let's drop down to the highlighted paragraph. It reads, Mountain Jews of the Caucasus. Hasdai ben Isaac, in his letters to the king of the Kazars in about 960 AD, says that according to a tradition, the Kazars formerly lived in the mountains of Seir. Seir in the eastern Caucasus. In other words, they lived in Mount Seir in the Caucasus Mountains. You can also find this in the Jewish Encyclopedia and Descriptive Record of the History of the Religion, which says the same thing, where it repeats the statement that the Kazars formerly lived in the mountains of Seir. That's Mount Seir. Seir in the eastern Caucasus. Miller is of the opinion that the Jews of the Caucasus introduced Judaism into the kingdom of the Kazars. And the next reference reads, Mountain Jews are those of the Caucasian Jews who live in villages in some towns of the provinces Dagestan, Turks, Kuban, and in the governments of Baku and Yasivlipol, and who speak an Iranian tongue, a dialect of the Tat. Skipping to the next paragraph, it reads, Hasdai ben Isaac, in his letters to the king of the Kazars in about 960 AD, says that according to a tradition, the Kazars formerly lived in the mountains of Seir, Seir in the eastern Caucasus. Miller is of the opinion that the Jews of the Caucasus introduced Judaism into the kingdom of the Kazars, and that the Jews of Dagestan originated in Azerbaijan. And the next reference reads, the territory of Seir began at a distance of 3 days' journey north of Derbent. It was AD 960 inhabited by Christians who yet lived on the best terms with Muslims. As you can see, fam, just to give you an idea of where Mount Seir was in the Caucasus Mountains, it was a 3-day journey north of Derbent. So let's take a look to see where Derbent is in the Caucasus. And for that, let's take a look at the Encyclopedia Britannica and look up the word Derbent. It says Derbent, city, southeastern Dagestan Republic, southwestern Russia, The city lies in the gap between the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains at their closest approach. And here's a map, fam, where you can see the city of Derbent, close to the Caspian Sea, close to the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains, aka the third Mount Seir. And remember, fam, Seir means hairy and shaggy, and was the home of Esau, who was hairy all over. And it was also home of the Horites, who were cave dwellers. Now, fam, did you know that the Caucasians who live in this region are the hairiest people on the planet? The New York Times. Still, there are genetically influenced variations in people. Whites tend to be hairier than blacks, and among whites, Mediterranean and Semitic people tend to be hairier than Scandinavians and Anglo-Saxons. And the next reference reads, Dermatology Times. Caucasians have the highest hair density among the ethnicities studied. Black people have the lowest. Asian people have hair density that falls somewhere in between. All right, family. Well, that concludes episode 1.
Go figure. Follow me